What if Three-Eye Atlas was never a surprise? What if prophets, poets, and ancient myths had already spoken of it centuries before a telescope ever caught its light? Maybe it isn't just a wanderer through space. Maybe it's the fulfillment of a warning written long ago. And if you'd like, share in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I love seeing how far this circle of night owls stretches. What if our ancestors saw more than we give them credit for? What if the old myths of burning stars, wandering lights, and heavenly messengers were not mere superstition, but fragmented memories of something real? Echoes of visitors like ʻOumuamua, Borisov, and Three-Eye Atlas drifting across the ages? Centuries before telescopes, the sky was not science. It was a theatre. Comets were not icy wanderers, they were omens, fiery spears hurled by gods, warnings of famine, plague, or war. In Europe, scribes recorded them as signs of doom. In China, court astrologers catalogued them with obsessive detail, noting their colours, their tails, the angles they carved through constellations. In the Arab world, scholars debated their nature, some insisting they were vapours rising from earth, others daring to claim they belonged to the deep. Again and again, one theme returned: the belief that some comets did not belong here. They were called strangers, intruders, messengers. Civilizations half a world apart used the same word messenger as if they already sensed these lights were not native to the solar system at all. And what if they were right? Imagine the terror of a medieval farmer who had never seen a city, never travelled beyond his village, standing in the night as a sudden light bloomed across the sky. To him, it was prophecy. To his priest, it was judgment. To his king, it was an omen of war. But to us, looking back with telescopes and simulations, it may have been something stranger. The fleeting shadow of an interstellar visitor, centuries before modern science could confirm the possibility. In 1680, a comet appeared so bright it was said to rival the Sunday flames, stretched across the sky for weeks, its tail curving longer than any memory could recall. Isaac Newton himself studied its path, wondering at its strange behaviour. His calculations proved that comets followed long orbits, yet even he noted that some seemed to arrive from no familiar direction. Could one have been a cousin of Three-Eye Atlas, slipping through unnoticed, its strangeness masked by lack of instruments? What if Three-Eye Atlas had been foretold, not in a single prophecy, but in 1,000 fragmented warnings, scattered across cultures? Not predictions in the scientific sense, but anticipations in mythic form. Ancient people knew the sky was not trustworthy. They knew visitors came unannounced. They knew silence could break. What if the warnings of Three-Eye Atlas were not written in data, but in riddles? What if centuries before the object appeared, echoes of its arrival had already been carved into stone, whispered in scripture, hidden in scrolls that no one took seriously? In almost every culture, there are tales of wanderers, heavenly strangers, that crossed the sky once, never to return. In medieval Europe, monks recorded them in the margins of illuminated manuscripts. Flaming torches, wheels of fire, long-tailed dragons that appeared without warning. In ancient China, imperial astronomers kept precise records of guest stars and comets, some described as travelling faster than anything familiar, cutting sharp lines across the heavens. In the Islamic Golden Age, scholars preserved reports of celestial bodies that seemed to appear from nowhere, their movements unlike the predictable orbits of known planets. These were not explanations. They were observations, clothed in myth. Yet read closely, they sound like predictions. A Persian text from the 12th century describes a stone from beyond the fixed stars, travelling in haste, shining but not burning. What could that have meant to its author? A comet, perhaps, or something closer to what we now call an interstellar visitor. In Europe, Renaissance astrologers wrote of stars with tails that herald change, born not of the sun, but of the deep void. Such phrases are often dismissed as metaphor, but is it coincidence that the language echoes so precisely what modern astronomers would later discover, that comets like Borisov and Three-Eye Atlas were not born in our system at all? And then there are the darker prophecies. In Mesoamerica, stories tell of smoking stars that race through the night, bringing upheaval. In Norse sagas, a fiery serpent crosses the heavens before Ragnarok, a messenger of ending. In these myths, The stranger in the sky is not omen of harvest or war, it is omen of collapse. Were these only stories? Or were they collective memories, inherited warnings of rare visitors whose arrivals had been seen, feared, and forgotten, only to be rewritten as myth? And what if the myths were never forgotten? What if they were preserved deliberately as prophecies meant to outlast generations, meant to remind us that silence was never to be trusted, that the sky could always break? The unsettling part is not that ancient texts describe wanderers. The unsettling part is how they describe them as messengers. Never just objects, never just accidents, always with purpose, always with meaning. And now, centuries later, we find ourselves staring at 3i Atlas, faster, older, stranger than the rest. Maybe the prophecies were not metaphor after all. Maybe they were rehearsal. What if even the father of modern science glimpsed the shadow of interstellar mystery? What if Isaac Newton, who tamed gravity with equations, was shaken by a comet whose path seemed almost untamable? In the winter of 1680, Europe watched the heavens with dread. A comet had appeared so bright it could be seen in daylight, so vast its tail stretched across the horizon like a burning spear. For ordinary people, it was prophecy, a firebrand from God, a herald of plague or war. For scholars, it was a test. Newton studied it obsessively. He had already begun to rewrite the rules of motion, proving that the same force that pulled an apple to Earth kept the moon in orbit. Comets, he thought, would be no different. But this one tested his faith in order itself. Its brightness grew so fierce it was said to rival the Sunday. Its arc through the heavens was long and strange, unlike the tame ellipses of planets. Working by candlelight, Newton calculated its orbit. What he found unsettled him. The comet's path was not familiar. It did not behave like a closed loop circling the Sunday. Its trajectory seemed longer, stranger, as if it came not from the solar system's outer fringes, but from nowhere at all. He recorded it, mapped it, and forced it into the framework of his laws. But privately, he admitted unease. Some comets, he said, might come from infinite space, from beyond the reach of the sun itself. Infinite space. It was a radical thought for the 17th century, and one that sounds eerily like prophecy now. Newton, without modern telescopes, without spectroscopy, without spacecraft, hinted at the truth we would confirm centuries later, that some comets are not ours, that wanderers drift between the stars, crossing into our skies only by chance. That silence can break without warning. The 1680 comet terrified not only peasants and priests, but also the man who defined order in the heavens. And perhaps it terrified him because it did not fit. What if what Newton glimpsed was more than a comet? What if, hidden in its brightness, was the same story we would later see in Borisov, in ʻOumuamua, in 3i Atlas, the story of a visitor, unbound, born of another sun? History does not record certainty, but the thought lingers. Centuries before our instruments could prove it, the idea was already here, alive in Newton's quiet fear. Perhaps 3i Atlas was not predicted in formulas or equations, but in the unease of a man who realized the universe was stranger than even he could calculate. What if some of the earliest astronomers already suspected truths they could not admit aloud? What if, centuries before 3i Atlas was discovered, they left behind riddles, carefully written fragments of wonder and fear, disguised as poetry, philosophy, or allegory? In the Middle Ages, the stars were not merely lights, they were symbols, guides, even warnings. Scholars risked their reputations, and sometimes their lives, if their interpretations strayed too far from accepted doctrine. And yet, hidden in their writings, there are curious lines that sound less like metaphor and more like veiled prophecy. Consider the words of John of Worcester, a 12th century monk who described a torch star crossing the sky with such speed it did not belong to the heavens. To his peers, it was mystical language. To us, centuries later, it echoes with recognition. A body moving too quickly, too sharply, perhaps even interstellar. Or the strange description in an Arabic manuscript from the 10th century, preserved in Cairo. A wandering stone that knew no master star, that fled from the circle and would not return. The phrasing is poetic, yes, but it captures something our modern science now knows to be real objects, unbound from any sun, free to drift the dark corridors between systems. Even Galileo, writing in the early 1600s, hinted at uncertainty when he studied comets. He admitted that some appeared too sudden, too irregular, to fit neatly into the geometry of orbits. He wrote cautiously, aware that his boldness with planets and moons had already provoked resistance. Yet between his lines is hesitation, as though he glimpsed something larger but could not afford to say it. Why riddles? Because direct statements would have been ridiculed, suppressed, or forgotten. But allegories survive. Poetry is harder to censor than equations. A metaphor can travel farther than a chart. And so the astronomers cloaked their astonishment in mythic tones, leaving fragments of their suspicions scattered like breadcrumbs across centuries. What if those riddles were not merely cultural flourishes, but warnings? What if they knew, even then, that the sky was not as stable as people believed, that visitors could arrive unannounced, shaking the illusion of silence? When 3i Atlas swept into our century, faster and stranger than any comet catalogued before, it seemed like revelation. But perhaps it was only confirmation of something whispered long ago. The riddles were not mistakes. They were messages for the future, reminders that the sky had always been more alive, more dangerous, and more mysterious than it pretended to be. What if those who sought gold in their crucibles were not only chasing wealth, but accidentally brushing against the secrets of the stars? What if the alchemists, men who mixed science, mysticism, and metaphor, were also the first to imagine wanderers like 3i Atlas? To most, alchemy was superstition. But beneath the symbolism lies careful observation. Alchemists were experimenters, record keepers, and poets of nature. They watched the skies with the same fervour they stirred their furnaces. Their writings are tangled in metaphor, gold as perfection, mercury as spirit, fire as transformation, but some passages strike an uncanny chord. One medieval manuscript, preserved in Prague, describes stones that fall from the deep, unburned by the sun, yet burning when near it. The phrase could be poetic invention, or it could be a clumsy attempt to describe exactly what we now know. Interstellar comets, frozen for eons in deep space, flaring only when they approach a star. Another alchemical text from Persia speaks of heavenly messengers of fire, arriving from beyond the spheres, warning of change. It was likely intended as allegory, and yet the language is startlingly close to how we now speak of 3i Atlas, as a messenger, strange and unsettling, carrying with it chemistry that does not belong to our system. The alchemists framed comets as signs of purification. To them, fire was never simple, it was transformation. And so a burning star in the heavens was a cosmic distillation, purging corruption from the world below. In their riddles, comets were not only omens of plague or war, they were tools of the cosmos, agents of change, messengers of balance. 3i Atlas fits that image too well to ignore. Its strange ratios, unlike any comet we had seen, were a kind of purification, forcing us to abandon our certainty, forcing us to confront the possibility that silence had never been silence at all. Why hide these ideas in riddles? Because to speak them plainly would have been dangerous. Alchemists lived under suspicion, and their writings were designed to veil secrets from prying eyes. What better disguise than metaphor? A comet could be written as a serpent, a falling stone, a heavenly fire. The truth would be preserved, but only for those with patience to decode it. What if 3i Atlas was not predicted in equations or star charts, but in riddles centuries old? What if, buried in those cryptic lines, our ancestors were warning us that the heavens would one day send messengers we could not ignore? Perhaps the legacy of alchemy is not failed recipes for immortality, but a strange kind of prophecy, the reminder that the sky was never ours alone. What if the seekers of gold, who stirred furnaces and whispered incantations in smoky chambers, glimpsed truths about the stars we have only just begun to prove? What if the alchemists, half scientists, half mystics, were not only hunting for transmutation, but also leaving coded predictions of celestial wanderers like 3i Atlas? Their writings are difficult to read now, tangled with symbols and metaphors. Gold was not always gold, fire was not always flame. A stone from heaven might mean more than a meteorite. It could be a coded description of something they observed but could not explain. In manuscripts from Europe and the Islamic world, we find repeated references to messengers of the deep and stones that do not belong to this Sunday. To their peers, these were riddles. To us, centuries later, they sound like hints of interstellar visitors. Alchemy was more than superstition. It was observation, wrapped in secrecy. Some alchemists carefully recorded the skies, treating comets as symbols of purification. They described stars that arrive suddenly and vanish forever, or fires born outside the reach of the solar fire. They didn't have the language of orbits or hyperbolic trajectories, but their metaphors suggest they knew some comets were not like the rest. What if 3I Atlas is exactly what they tried to describe, an uninvited guest, carrying chemistry no earthly furnace could imitate? Its skewed ratios and volatile mix were unlike any comet we had studied before. In their symbolic terms, it was a stone untouched by the sun, yet blazing when near it. The unsettling part is not whether alchemists predicted 3I Atlas directly. The unsettling part is how their metaphors line up with modern discoveries. Were they only reaching for myth, or were they leaving fragments of genuine observations, encoded in riddles, waiting for us to understand? Perhaps alchemy's strangest legacy is not failed recipes for immortality, but its quiet warnings, that not every light in the sky is ours, and that silence can break in ways we do not expect. What if humanity once knew more than we do now? What if ancient libraries, destroyed by fire and conquest, held the first catalogues of interstellar visitors, records of comets so strange they could not be explained, preserved for centuries until they were lost? The Library of Alexandria is legend, but others existed. In Baghdad, during the Islamic Golden Age, scholars copied texts on astronomy and kept meticulous records of comets. In Nalanda, in India, monks preserved centuries of celestial observations. In Byzantium, scribes wrote about wandering stars that burned too brightly or too strangely to fit familiar patterns. One Byzantine record describes a star that carried smoke without flame, swifter than the rest, and gone within days. Another Chinese chronicle tells of a comet that divided its tail in two directions at once. Impossible behavior for a natural body. For generations, historians dismissed these as exaggerations. But what if they were careful attempts to describe visitors like ʻOumuamua, Borisov, or 3I Atlas anomalies no one at the time could explain? Think of what we lost. When the House of Wisdom in Baghdad was burned, manuscripts dissolved in rivers. When Nalanda was destroyed, thousands of scrolls turned to ash. When European wars tore through monasteries, careful records vanished in smoke. How many descriptions of strange wanderers were erased? How many warnings were lost? The silence we feel today may not be silence at all. It may be ignorance. Perhaps the sky has always broken its stillness with visitors, and perhaps our ancestors knew it, but their voices were drowned by time, leaving us to rediscover the truth only when 3I Atlas forced itself upon our instruments. What if the greatest silence is not in the stars, but in our own memory? What if the Renaissance was not only the rebirth of art, but also the rebirth of suspicion that the sky was never as quiet as people believed? In those centuries, thinkers began to question whether comets truly belonged to us, or whether they were travelers from beyond. Johannes Kepler, who mapped the laws of planetary motion, described comets as guests of the solar system. Guests do not stay, they pass through. His choice of word was no accident. It revealed that he suspected some comets came from places we could not yet imagine. Galileo, too, wrote carefully of comets, admitting they behaved in ways that unsettled him. He dared to say they were not atmospheric vapours, as some believed, but true celestial bodies, though he stopped short of calling them visitors from the stars. These men lived in dangerous times. Ideas too bold could be condemned. Yet hidden in their writings is a persistent theme. Not all lights in the sky are permanent members of our cosmic family. Some come from elsewhere. Some arrive uninvited. When 3I Atlas arrived centuries later, it was easy to think of it as new, unprecedented. But perhaps it was exactly what Kepler suspected, a guest. Its velocity betrayed its origin. Its chemistry betrayed its alien pantry. It fit not into any orbit, but into the very suspicion those thinkers carried in secret. The Renaissance visionaries gave us permission to imagine that the silence of the sky was not silence at all, but a veil. They did not have proof, but they had instinct. And instinct sometimes arrives centuries before certainty. What if Three-Eye Atlas was not a discovery, but a confirmation of suspicions whispered long ago? What if the dragons and serpents of myth were not creatures of fantasy, but echoes of visitors blazing across ancient skies? What if Three-Eye Atlas was already foretold in the language of fire and serpent scales? In Norse mythology, the end of the world Ragnarok is preceded by a fiery serpent winding across the heavens. In Mesoamerica, the god Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, was said to descend from the stars, blazing in the night sky. In medieval Europe, manuscripts show comets drawn as writhing serpents, their tails twisting like bodies in flight. These were not coincidences. People across cultures and continents saw the same shapes, curling flames across the heavens, sudden intruders with serpentine trails. They did not speak of comets as icy debris. They spoke of messengers, omens, harbingers, always the same word, messenger. When Three-Eye Atlas crossed our instruments, carrying chemistry that resisted all categories, it was easy to forget that humanity had already lived with this fear. The fiery serpent had always been in our myths. We had always known the sky could break. And perhaps those myths were more than superstition. Perhaps they were memory, a record, in the only language available at the time, of interstellar wanderers that came before. A comet too bright, too strange, too unrepeatable, preserved not in equations, but in stories. If so, then Three-Eye Atlas is not a surprise. It is a return. It is the fiery serpent once more, blazing across our century, with a reminder that silence is fragile. What if prophecy was not myth at all, but history misunderstood? What if the history of astronomy is littered with ghosts, comets that appeared suddenly, terrified generations, then vanished into silence, never seen again? What if some of those forgotten comets were not comets at all, but early messengers like ʻOumuamua, Borisov, and Three-Eye Atlas? The chronicles are full of such reports. A sudden light, brighter than Venus, streaking across the sky for weeks, then gone. A fiery star that burned in one season and never returned. For the chroniclers, it was enough to write, it came, it burned, it went. They lacked the tools to measure, to record, to prove, and so the details were lost. To us, those words sound familiar. They sound like the pattern of interstellar visitors. Sudden appearance, brief stay, permanent departure. Not orbits, not cycles, but one-time intrusions from the dark. How many such visitors did we miss? How many centuries of interstellar objects slipped past us, their strangeness disguised by our ignorance? The silence we think we hear today may not be silence at all. It may be memory's failure. It may be the echo of visitors seen and forgotten, their warnings lost in myth, their paths erased from history. 3. Atlas may be only the most recent reminder that the silence of the sky has always been fragile, and that we were never as alone as we believed. What if silence was never silence at all, but a stage on which omens played? What if every fiery streak across the medieval sky was not superstition, but part of a long story whose ending pointed toward Three-Eye Atlas? In the Middle Ages, comets were not curiosities. They were warnings. Monks recorded them as torches of God's anger. Priests described them as dragons tearing the heavens. Kings feared them as signs of rebellion and downfall. The people looked up and saw not science, but judgment. And yet, within all the fear, there was recognition. These were not ordinary stars. They did not belong. They were intruders. The chronicles of Europe are full of such sightings. Matthew Paris, an English monk, described one in 1230 as a torch thrown across the sky, sudden and swift. In China, astronomers of the Han dynasty wrote of guest stars and comets that appeared uninvited, refusing to obey the cycles of familiar bodies. In both languages, across continents, the same idea emerged: visitors, guests, messengers. They did not speak of orbits, because they could not. But they knew unpredictability when they saw it. They knew silence could break without warning. To them, each comet was not only an omen, it was a reminder that the heavens were not sealed. When Three-Eye Atlas appeared centuries later, scientists spoke of its hyperbolic trajectory and alien chemistry. But perhaps its truest meaning was the same one that medieval chroniclers already understood. The sky is not ours alone. What if the first careful records of interstellar wanderers were preserved not in Europe, but in Baghdad, Damascus, and Cairo? What if the Islamic Golden Age, with its scholars and observatories, quietly documented the same anomalies that puzzle us today? From the 9th to the 13th century, Islamic astronomers advanced the study of the heavens with unmatched precision. They charted stars, refined planetary models, and recorded comets with detail that put much of Europe to shame. Al-Sufi, known as the stargazer, described guest stars that appeared without warning, brighter than any known planet. Ibn Yunus, writing in the year 1000, noted a comet whose speed seemed beyond the pull of the Sunday. To them, these were signs of a vast and orderly universe. But their words, guessed, untethered, beyond the pull, sound hauntingly familiar to us now. They describe what modern astronomers call ʻOumuamua, Borisov, and 3 Atlas, objects born elsewhere, arriving suddenly and leaving forever. Their manuscripts survive in fragments, written in careful Arabic calligraphy, full of precision but also humility. They did not claim to know what these visitors were. They only wrote that they came and that they did not belong. What if those texts were not only observations, but predictions? What if, in recording the anomalies of their time, they were warning us of what would come again? The silence we thought was unbroken may never have existed. Perhaps the watchers of the Islamic Golden Age were already listening, centuries before our telescopes learned to see. What if the Renaissance, remembered for its art and rebirth of science, was also the rebirth of suspicion that the sky held strangers? In 1577, Tycho Brahe observed a comet that shattered old beliefs. Until then, many thought comets were vapors in Earth's atmosphere. Tycho proved otherwise. Measuring its parallax, he showed it moved beyond the moon. This was revolutionary. Comets were not earthly. They belonged to the heavens. Kepler, his student, went further. He described comets as guests of the solar system. Guests do not stay. They arrive uninvited, disrupt, then leave. It was a word chosen with care, a hint that some of these visitors might not belong to us at all. Galileo joined the debate, arguing fiercely with Jesuits over whether comets were illusions or true celestial bodies. He sensed their strangeness, but lacked the tools to prove it. The Renaissance debate marked a turning point. Silence was cracked not by proof of interstellar objects, but by doubt. Thinkers dared to suspect the sky was not trustworthy. They admitted some bodies resisted explanation, as though they were not native. When 3 Atlas entered our instruments centuries later, it was not an anomaly, it was the fulfillment of their suspicions. The Renaissance did not solve the silence, it prepared us for its end. What if the civilizations of the Americas preserved the clearest prophecies of all? What if their stories of smoking stars were not fantasy, but echoes of visitors like 3 Atlas? The Aztecs feared comets as signs of great upheaval. In their codices, they are drawn as serpents trailing smoke across the night. The Mayan Dresden Codex pairs comet diagrams with predictions of famine and war, as though the heavens themselves carried warnings. The Inca told stories of stars not born of this world, swift and unreturning. These were not casual myths. To these cultures, the heavens were clocks, calendars, and gods. Every change demanded meaning. A comet that appeared suddenly and never returned was not noise, it was message. And so they recorded it, passed it down, wove it into prophecy. When 3 Atlas appeared in our century, carrying chemistry that resisted categories, scientists wrote papers and ran simulations. But the Mayans and Aztecs would not have been surprised. They'd always known that the silence of the sky was fragile. Perhaps the fiery serpent was never myth. Perhaps it was memory, a story of earlier visitors rewritten as prophecy to warn the future. What if the truest fear of the Middle Ages was not plague, famine, or war, but the unpredictable sky? What if silence itself was terrifying, because it could be broken at any moment by a visitor no one expected? Medieval chronicles are filled with terror. In 1456, a comet appeared so bright it rivaled the moon. Pope Calixtus III ordered prayers to ward off its influence. In 1066, the Bayeux tapestry shows Halley's comet blazing as a fiery omen over the Norman invasion. Chroniclers called them dragons, torches, serpents, always invaders, never neighbours. To them, silence was never permanent. The heavens could break without warning, and when they did, it meant catastrophe. Each comet was a messenger, not only of war, but of the unknown. When 3I Atlas arrived in 2024, the fear wore different clothing. Scientists spoke of trajectories, volatiles, and isotopes. Yet beneath the equations was the same dread. A stranger had entered the sky, and silence could no longer be trusted. The medieval fear of the unknown was not ignorance, it was instinct. They knew, as we now know, that the universe does not sit still forever. It waits, and then it moves. What if the silence of the stars was never silence at all? What if, across centuries, they have been whispering to us subtle, fleeting messages, written not in words but in lights that flare, move, and vanish before anyone can fully understand? Perhaps the stars have always spoken, but our ears were not ready, and our minds were not patient enough to translate their quiet grammar. The Chinese called them guest stars. These were sudden intruders, stars that appeared where no star had been, blazing with brilliance for days, weeks, or months before fading into nothingness. Many of these were supernovae, explosions that marked the violent death of suns. Yet not all of them fit the pattern. Some guest stars moved, some streaked with tails. Some lingered too briefly, their behaviour unlike either planet or star. In their records, we find phrases that tremble with mystery. A wandering star, swift as an arrow, or a flame from the void, gone in 10 days. Those words echo uncomfortably close to what modern astronomers now describe as interstellar wanderers. Bodies like ʻOumuamua, Borisov, and 3I Atlas crossing our sky with strange speed and stranger chemistry. In Persia, scholars wrote of stars that carried smoke but no fire, bodies that did not glow with their own heat, yet still burned when close to the sunday. In medieval Europe, chroniclers described comets that came without birth and left without death. These phrases sound poetic, but they also reveal unease. The observers knew these objects did not fit into cycles. They were not Halley's Comet, returning predictably. They were strangers, outsiders, intruders. Why did so many cultures describe them in such similar terms? Why did the words guest, messenger, and wanderer appear again and again in languages separated by oceans? Perhaps because silence was never truly trusted. People instinctively sensed that the heavens could break, that not all lights belonged. They lacked the mathematics to prove it, but they had the wisdom to describe it. Their words survive as whispers across centuries. Today, we are tempted to believe we have surpassed such superstition. We call them comets, asteroids, interstellar objects. We use language precise enough to fill textbooks. Yet the core meaning remains unchanged. 3I Atlas was not ours. It came from the deep void, carried chemistry unlike any comet we had measured, and departed forever. Scientists called it alien in origin. Ancient astronomers would have called it a messenger. Different tongues, same story. And what if those whispers were not coincidences at all, but fragments of a larger conversation? Perhaps the stars have always been seeded with visitors. Perhaps, every few centuries, one of them drifts into our view long enough to unsettle, brief enough to vanish into silence. The records of China, Persia, and Europe may be earlier chapters in the same book we are still reading. 3I Atlas is not an isolated event, but the continuation of a rhythm written across millennia. The unsettling thought is this: how many whispers did we miss? How many lights passed unnoticed because no one was watching, or no one recorded them, or their records burned in forgotten libraries? We call the heavens silent because our memory is broken, not because the sky has been quiet. Perhaps the stars have always whispered, and 3I Atlas was simply the first whisper we finally understood. What if Europe's most fearful prophecies were not only about kings, plagues, or wars, but about the sky itself? What if the chroniclers who filled their manuscripts with warnings of fire and pestilence were also recording celestial visitors like 3I Atlas, describing them in the only language they had: prophecy, doom, omen? The Middle Ages in Europe were haunted by comets. They were feared not as natural phenomena but as divine warnings, instruments of fate wielded against humanity. When one appeared, cities trembled, priests held vigils, kings consulted astrologers. The common people believed famine, disease, or invasion would follow. This was not ignorance, it was instinct. A sky that seemed eternal, orderly, and silent could be broken without warning. and every time it broke, disaster seemed close behind. In 1347, on the eve of the Black Death, chronicles tell of a strange celestial fire. A manuscript from Florence speaks of a wandering flame that came not from the sun, nor from any star, but fled through the heavens and vanished. The timing bound the comet forever in memory. Pestilence followed, killing millions, and the connection was carved into prophecy. Another text from Nuremberg describes a fiery torch crossing the sky in the same year, unlike the others, refusing to return. Such details strike us now as eerily familiar. A body that refuses return. That is the very essence of an interstellar visitor. Even centuries later, the fear lingered. In 1456, Halley's comet passed, blazing across Europe. Its return is predictable to us now, but then it was terrifying. Pope Calixtus III issued prayers to ward off its influence, treating the comet as a demonic intruder. What must it have felt like to look up and see a burning spear stretch across the heavens? Uncertain whether it was weapon, messenger, or monster. But not every comet returned. Some appeared once, without precedent, and were never seen again. To medieval minds, this refusal to return was proof that they came from beyond the known heavens. They did not fit the cycles of planets or the harmony of spheres. They were outsiders, breaking the silence of the sky and then disappearing into it once more. 3. Atlas would have been unimaginable to them in terms of chemistry or isotopes, but in essence, they already knew what it was. A fiery visitor, unbound, carrying meaning. To them, it would not have been an astronomical discovery. It would have been a prophecy fulfilled, a final messenger of doom, warning of the fragility of silence. And perhaps, in a way, they were right. Our language has changed, but our response has not. When ʻOumuamua appeared, we debated its nature endlessly. When Borisov blazed across the sky, we marveled at its alien recipe. When 3i Atlas was found, faster, older, stranger, we felt unease. We wrote papers, not prophecies, but the instinct was the same. Visitors break silence, and silence cannot be trusted. What if the dark prophecies of Europe were not exaggerations, but warnings dressed in medieval clothing? What if the chroniclers of Florence, Nuremberg, and Rome were recording interstellar visitors in the only words they knew: fire, torch, serpent, judgment? Their prophecies may sound strange to us, but the message is unchanged. The sky does not belong to us. It has always been a place of strangers. The unsettling thought is that Europe's fear was not ignorance, but recognition. They sensed that the silence above them was fragile, temporary, and false. And in their language of doom, they left behind whispers of what we would one day confirm. The universe is full of messengers. What if silence itself was part of the teaching? What if the astronomers of past centuries, gazing through primitive instruments, or with nothing but their naked eyes, learned the same lesson we struggle with now, that most nights give you nothing, and that patience is the price of revelation? In the 16th century, a Danish nobleman named Tycho Brahe built Uraniborg, a grand observatory on an island. It was a palace of astronomy, with instruments larger and more precise than any before. Night after night, Tycho and his assistants recorded the positions of stars and planets, often with no new discoveries to show for their work. Silence was the rule. But Tycho did not despair. He believed silence was not emptiness, but preparation. Each blank page in his notebooks made the sudden appearance of a comet or nova more significant, more unforgettable. In 1577, that patience was rewarded. A great comet crossed the sky, visible across Europe. Many still believed comets were atmospheric vapors, ghosts in the upper air. Tycho proved otherwise. He measured its parallax, the apparent shift of its position against the stars, and showed it lay far beyond the moon. It was not an atmospheric illusion. It was celestial, vast, and real. The silence had cracked. His student, Johannes Kepler, went further. He described comets as guests of the solar system. Guests do not stay. They arrive, they disturb, they leave. The word was deliberate, a sign that Kepler suspected what we now confirm. Some comets are not natives at all. They are visitors, strangers crossing from the deep void. But after 1577, The silence returned. Comets were rare. Years passed, then decades, with little more than the steady rhythm of planets and stars. To most people, this was reassuring. To astronomers, it was torment. They knew the silence could end again at any moment. Each clear night was both comfort and tension. Would the stillness hold, or would the sky shatter once more? We face the same paradox today. Our telescopes sweep the heavens with precision Tycho could not imagine. Nights pass with nothing unusual. Silence seems to reign, and yet we know it is temporary. ʻOumuamua appeared suddenly, then was gone. Borisov blazed, then faded. 3. Atlas came, older and stranger than the rest, and then slipped back into darkness. Between them, silence stretched, teaching us patience. The astronomers who waited in silence centuries ago knew the same truth. The sky is not a constant backdrop. It is alive, and its stillness is part of the performance. The silence between visitors is not absence. It is stagecraft. It is rehearsal. It prepares us for the shock of interruption. What if silence itself is the most important part of the message? What if the heavens know that to teach us humility, they must hold back, leaving us restless, watchful, always aware that the stillness can break without warning? The astronomers who waited in silence left us more than data. They left us discipline. They taught us how to endure the emptiness without losing faith, how to recognize that stillness is not failure, but preparation. And perhaps, if 3 Atlas has taught us anything, it is that the discipline of waiting is as valuable as the discovery itself. The silence is never permanent. It is always temporary, and when it breaks, it rewrites everything. What if the clearest warnings of interstellar visitors were preserved not in Europe, but in the East? What if China, Korea, and Japan, nations that watch the heavens with discipline for centuries, left behind records of wanderers like 3 Atlas, only for us to overlook their meaning? In the West, comets were feared as omens, but they were rarely measured. In Asia, the approach was different. Chinese court astronomers were tasked with recording every change in the heavens, for it was believed that the fate of the emperor was bound to the stars. For over 2,000 years, these men wrote down what they saw with astonishing detail. They noted the length of a comet's tail, its direction of motion, its colour, the number of days it lingered. Their records stretch back farther than almost any other tradition, forming a continuous archive of the sky. Among those records are entries that do not fit the ordinary. A Tang dynasty text describes a guest star that moved like an arrow, refusing the curve of the heavens. It appeared suddenly, grew bright, and vanished within weeks. Another account from the Song dynasty tells of a flame from the deep void, trailing smoke without fire. These are not the words of myth, but of observers who could not force what they saw into the cycles of familiar comets. To us, their descriptions sound strikingly like interstellar visitors, bodies that arrive from beyond the sun, blaze briefly, and never return. Japan's chronicles tell similar stories. During the Heian period, court scribes recorded a dragon of smoke that raced across the heavens faster than the wind, seen for only 10 nights before disappearing. In Korea, astronomers described a guest star unbound, without return, brighter than Venus, yet gone within a season. The language is poetic, but the pattern is unmistakable. These were one-time visitors, objects without orbit, outsiders crossing the stage of the sky. The tragedy is how much has been lost. Wars destroyed archives, fires consumed scrolls, floods erased entire libraries. The records we have today are only fragments, scattered across museums and monasteries, waiting for scholars to translate them. How many descriptions of interstellar wanderers lie hidden in neglected manuscripts? How many warnings are still unread? What if silence is not real at all, but a symptom of our amnesia? Perhaps the sky has always been visited by strangers. Perhaps generations of observers saw them, feared them, and dutifully recorded them. But because their tools could not measure velocity or chemistry, their accounts became stories, their stories became myth, and myth was dismissed. The silence we believe in today may not be silence, it may be forgetfulness, and so we arrive in our century, staring at 3 Atlas, faster and stranger than any comet we had studied. To us, it feels like revelation, but perhaps to the East, Centuries ago, it was already known. Perhaps their records, written in brushstrokes on silk and paper, already warned that silence could not be trusted. Perhaps Three-Eye Atlas is not a discovery at all, but a confirmation of something our ancestors tried to tell us. The unsettling thought is this: maybe we are not the first to notice the messengers. Maybe we are only the first to measure them. The East may have whispered the truth long ago, but the West forgot to listen. What if prophecy was never superstition at all, but astronomy spoken in another tongue? What if the fiery dragons, smoking serpents, and swords of flame, described by our ancestors, were not the ramblings of fearful imaginations, but the earliest language for visitors like Three-Eye Atlas? Everywhere humanity looked, the pattern was the same. Comets were never described as ordinary. In Europe, they were fiery torches, signals of God's anger. In China, they were guest stars, outsiders who arrived without invitation and disappeared without promise of return. In the Middle East, scholars described them as wandering stars, bodies that moved against the order of heaven. In the Americas, the Aztecs and Mayans drew them as serpents, trailing smoke, divine messengers winding across the night. Different cultures, different metaphors, but always the same truth. These objects were intruders. They carried meaning. They broke silence. The language of omen was not clumsy. It was symbolic. For cultures that believed the sky mirrored the fate of humanity, a visitor that came suddenly and vanished forever could not be meaningless. If the heavens were a book, then comets were punctuation marks, interruptions that demanded attention. That attention was translated into prophecy. A fiery sword meant war. A smoking serpent meant upheaval. A wandering star meant a change in dynasty. Today, we think we are more advanced. We speak of volatile ratios, isotopic abundances, and hyperbolic velocities. But strip away the vocabulary, and what remains is not so different. We, too, believe that visitors carry meaning. ʻOumuamua broke our categories of shape. Borisov broke our assumptions about chemistry. Three-Eye Atlas broke our patience, reminding us that silence cannot be trusted. Scientists argued over its ratios, its origin, its age, but beneath the equations was the same instinct our ancestors felt. This is a messenger. What if our science is only another form of omen language? The astronomer with his data table and the monk with his torch star are speaking different dialects of the same tongue. Both are trying to translate the shock of the unexpected. Both are responding to silence broken by anomaly. Both are assigning meaning to a body that does not belong. The unsettling question is this: were our ancestors wrong to fear, or were they simply right too soon? A medieval scribe might have drawn a dragon blazing across the sky. We call it Three-Eye Atlas. He wrote of famine and war. We write of alien chemistry. But the thread between us is unbroken. We both understand that silence can lie, and that the universe sometimes speaks through strangers. Perhaps prophecy was never about predicting specific disasters. Perhaps it was always about preparing us for the truth. The universe is not still. It sends messengers. It intrudes on our silence. It breaks the illusion of safety. And the language of omen, strange though it seems, preserved that truth for centuries until we could measure it. When we look at Three-Eye Atlas today, we see a body with strange ratios, an object older than our sun, chemistry that makes no sense. But if we step back, what we are really seeing is exactly what our ancestors described: a fiery serpent, a wandering star, a messenger from the deep. Different words, same recognition. The sky has always spoken. We have always listened. The only thing that changes is the language. What if Three-Eye Atlas was never discovery, but destiny? What if its arrival had already been written into the fabric of human thought, hiding in myths, manuscripts, and scientific unease for centuries, waiting for us to finally recognize it? Perhaps the third messenger was not accident at all, but fulfillment of a shadow that has always been with us. The suspicion that some comets did not belong is older than telescopes. Johannes Kepler, writing in the early 1600s, described comets as guests of the solar system. A guest is not family. A guest arrives from elsewhere, disrupts the quiet, and then departs. Kepler's word choice was deliberate. He sensed something that mathematics could not yet prove. Not every comet was native. Isaac Newton, studying the blazing comet of 1680, was shaken by its strange path. He forced its trajectory into his equations, but the orbit did not behave as it should. Privately, he admitted that some comets might come from infinite space. Infinite space, an extraordinary phrase in the 17th century, and one that sounds eerily like prophecy now. Newton had no instruments to prove it, but he suspected what Three-Eye Atlas would one day confirm. Wanderers arrive from beyond the Sunday. Outside Europe, similar whispers existed. Chinese records spoke of guest stars that appeared suddenly, burned brightly, then vanished. Islamic scholars described flames from beyond the spheres, bodies whose behavior could not be explained by the known heavens. In Mesoamerica, the Mayans and Aztecs told of smoking serpents and fiery messengers, lights that crossed the sky once and never again. Different cultures, different metaphors, but always the same sense. The silence was fragile, and visitors were inevitable. What if all of these were predictions, not metaphors? What if humanity has always known, in some shadowed way, that the sky could not remain silent forever? We did not have the language of hyperbolic velocity or isotopic ratios, but we had the language of omen, prophecy, and unease. And in that language, we preserved the truth. The universe sends messengers. In our own time, those predictions became real. ʻOumuamua appeared first, long and thin, refusing to fit the categories of asteroid or comet. Its path was hyperbolic. It came once, then left forever. Scientists debated, but the shadow of prediction had already prepared us. Kepler's guest had arrived. Then came Borisov, blazing across the sky, the first confirmed interstellar comet. Its chemistry betrayed it. Too much carbon monoxide, too little water. It was not like anything from our own system. The ancient whispers of flames from beyond the spheres had been right. Another shadow confirmed. And then, the third, Three-Eye Atlas. Faster, older, stranger. Its chemistry did not simply differ. It resisted all categories. Ratios skewed beyond what models could explain. It was not only visitor, it was reminder. The shadow of prediction was fulfilled. The unsettling question is this. If the shadow of prediction has always been with us, what else has already been foretold? If myths, manuscripts, and uneasy equations all converge to point toward interstellar visitors, then perhaps their other warnings of silence as test, of messengers as harbingers, should not be dismissed so easily. Perhaps the true meaning of Three-Eye Atlas is not in its chemistry or its speed, but in its inevitability. It arrived because it had to. It was always part of the story. The only surprise was that we were surprised. The shadow of prediction stretches backward across centuries and forward into futures we cannot yet see. It whispers that Three-Eye Atlas was not anomaly, not coincidence, but confirmation. The silence was never silence. It was a promise, waiting to be broken. What if the real message of Three-Eye Atlas was not in its motion, but in its breath? What if its coma and tail, the faint glowing atmosphere it shed as it neared the sun, carried more meaning than any orbit could? A comet's dust is not just residue, it is recipe. Each molecule is a word, each ratio a grammar, each spectrum a language waiting to be read. And Three-Eye Atlas spoke a dialect that was unlike anything from home. Comets in our system are familiar. They exhale water when warmed, releasing other volatiles in predictable ratios. Their breath tells the story of where they were born, in the icy outskirts of the solar nebula, far from the sun, where water, carbon dioxide, and methane froze together in harmony. Their chemistry is varied but recognizable, like recipes from the same kitchen. But when telescopes caught the breath of Three-Eye Atlas, they tasted something alien. Too much carbon monoxide, not enough water. Strange balances that no local comet could mimic. Its recipe belonged to another star's pantry. Scientists debated furiously. Could it have formed in a colder system, where water ice was scarce but carbon monoxide plentiful? Could it have been shaped by radiation, unlike our own? The explanations multiplied, but none fit neatly. Its chemistry seemed not just unusual, but deliberate, as if tuned to announce, "I am not from here." The unsettling thought is that chemistry is biography. Ratios record origin. Every grain of dust is a fossil of the environment in which it formed. To analyze 3i Atlas was to peer into another world's kitchen, to glimpse a climate, a star, a history we could never see directly. The alien recipe told us that somewhere else, far away, planets and comets formed under rules slightly skewed from ours, and if their recipes differ, so too might their outcomes. Change the pantry, and you change the life that might one day rise from it. Some whispered about intention. What if the recipe was not only natural, but chosen? An advanced civilization, seeking to leave a mark, could alter the balance of volatiles, enriching some, purging others, sculpting a signature in the dust. Chemistry is the one language guaranteed to survive the void. Molecules do not rust or crumble easily. Ratios endure across light years. A comet can be messenger without inscription, its very breath a code. Others cautioned against such leaps. One comet cannot speak for an entire system. Our own Oort cloud contains bodies with wildly different chemistries. Diversity is natural. Outliers are expected. 3i Atlas may be extreme, but it may not be unique. And yet, the unease remained. Why did the first 3 interstellar visitors all resist our categories in different ways? One in shape, one in chemistry, one in both. Was that randomness or rhythm? The dust of 3i Atlas lingered in data long after the body itself was gone. Graphs and spectra replaced the awe of sight, but the message remained. Its alien recipe could not be undone. It had burned into our memory the truth that the galaxy is plural. There is no universal kitchen, no single way the cosmos cooks its planets and comets. Our home is not template but variation. What if the dust was the real message? What if the ratios were prophecy? To hold even a fragment of 3i Atlas would be to cradle a piece of another world's history. But even without the fragment, we heard enough. We learned that silence is not uniform. It is full of flavors we have not yet tasted. Perhaps the strangest thought is that our own comets are speaking too. Their recipes are drifting outward, leaking our pantry into space. If others are listening, they already know us. And so, in tasting 3i Atlas, we may also have realized a deeper truth. The galaxy is already dining together. The only question is whether we recognize the table. What if silence is not absence, but the loudest sound of all? What if, after the blaze of 3i Atlas faded into the dark, the quiet that followed was not relief but pressure, heavier, sharper, more unsettling than noise itself? The silence that came after the third messenger was different from all others. It did not soothe, it did not reassure, it stalked. After ʻOumuamua, silence meant denial. Perhaps it was a fluke. After Borisov, silence meant anticipation. Surely another would come. But after 3i Atlas, silence meant pattern. 3 visitors in one short span of years, then nothing. The quiet that followed was not natural. It felt chosen, as though the universe had closed its mouth deliberately, watching to see how we would respond. Astronomers felt it first. Their instruments, primed by the excitement of 3 anomalies, now scanned empty skies. Survey pipelines flagged nothing unusual. Nights passed with only the predictable rhythm of planets and stars. On paper, this was normal. In practice, it was unbearable. Silence had changed character. Once it was background, now it was foreground. Once it was comfort, now it was question. The absence bred 2 opposite fears. One fear was that nothing more would come, that ʻOumuamua, Borisov, and 3i Atlas were all we would ever see, that the story had ended with riddles unanswered. The other fear was that something even stranger was already inbound, larger, clearer, undeniable, and we were simply not ready. It is a cruel thing to dread both famine and flood at once. For the public, silence allowed forgetting. News cycles moved on. The third messenger was filed away as curiosity, but for those who had watched its alien chemistry unfold in graphs and spectra, silence was torment. They refreshed databases at odd hours, checked detection logs obsessively, whispered to each other in conferences. Have you heard? Any anomalies? Silence became rumor. Rumor became paranoia. Some insisted the quiet was evidence of design. It is too neat, they said. 3 in a row, then nothing. It feels like choreography. Others argued for patience. Interstellar objects are rare. We were lucky. Wait long enough, and another will appear. Both positions revealed the same truth. Silence had become unbearable. It demanded explanation. What if silence itself is part of the message? A teacher pauses between questions to let the student think. A storyteller pauses before the next act to heighten anticipation. A hunter pauses in the forest to listen. The stillness is not empty. It is strategy. And so perhaps the silence after Three-Eye Atlas was never meant to reassure. Perhaps it was meant to test. Would we prepare? Would we coordinate? Would we let denial return? Or would we sharpen our instruments and build our interceptors, ready for the next? In those years of quiet, humanity changed. Proposals for ready-to-launch spacecraft grew serious. Telescope networks became more connected, data more open. Even skeptics began to speak differently. They no longer said if another object would come. They said when. The silence had forced us to surrender doubt. The quiet sky above us was no longer trustworthy. It was no longer neutral. Every blank night was loaded with memory, with ghosts of 3 visitors, with the awareness that silence can break without warning. What if silence unsettled us because we finally understood what it really was? Not absence, not rest, but waiting. The silence after Three-Eye Atlas was alive, and it taught us that the most dangerous sound in the universe may not be the roar of catastrophe, but the whisper of nothing at all. What if the silence after Three-Eye Atlas was not silence at all, but countdown? What if every empty night sky, every blank survey frame, every absence of anomaly was not nothingness, but ticking an invisible clock moving toward the next arrival? After 3 messengers in less than a decade, astronomers could no longer treat interstellar visitors as flukes. ʻOumuamua broke the categories of shape and motion. Borisov broke the categories of chemistry. Three-Eye Atlas broke both. 3 anomalies, one after another, left no room for coincidence. The question was no longer if there would be another, but when. The mood inside observatories shifted. Proposals for sky surveys changed their language. Where once they had written, in the event of a future interstellar object, they now wrote, for the next interstellar object. The difference was small on the page, but monumental in the mind. It revealed a quiet surrender. The silence was temporary. The countdown had begun. Waiting became institutionalized. Telescope time was carved into flexible blocks, ready to pivot when a new candidate appeared. Space agencies funded concepts for interceptor missions, spacecraft stored in readiness, engines cold, waiting to be launched at short notice. The plans were no longer speculative, they were policy, and yet, waiting was not neutral. It was pressure. Each empty night felt heavier than the last. Scientists refreshed survey logs obsessively, looking for streaks of light that did not belong. Every false alarm, a satellite flare, a miscalculated orbit, was a small rehearsal for the real thing. Even the disappointments confirmed the sense that something was imminent. The silence was not void, it was suspense. 2 fears grew, contradictory yet equally sharp. One was the fear that nothing else would come, that the silence would stretch for centuries, leaving us with only 3 riddles and no answers. The other was the fear that the next arrival was already inbound, stranger and more undeniable than any before, and that we were still unprepared. To dread both famine and flood is a peculiar cruelty, but it is exactly what the countdown inspired. For the public, life continued as usual. The memory of Three-Eye Atlas faded, buried under headlines of politics, war, and technology. But in the quiet rooms of observatories, the sense of countdown never faded. Astronomers felt it in their bones. Students trained under professors who told them not if, but when. Careers were planned around the next anomaly. Budgets were justified with inevitability. The silence had become schedule. What if this was the point all along? What if the countdown was never about visitors, but about us? Waiting reveals character. Do we grow complacent, treating silence as permanent? Or do we grow disciplined, sharpening our instruments, rehearsing our responses, preparing for the inevitable break? The silence after Three-Eye Atlas did not calm us. It trained us. It forced us to live in suspense, to anticipate the knock on the cosmic door, to prepare for what might step through. Each day without discovery was not reassurance. It was a louder tick of the clock. And then came the whispers. A faint mover flagged in a survey, too fast to be ordinary. Rumours spread through back channels. For a few hours, it seemed the countdown had reached 0. Then came the correction. An error, a satellite reflection, nothing more. Relief and disappointment tangled together. But the rumor reminded everyone of the truth. The next one could appear any night. The silence was never silence. It was rhythm. It was heartbeat. It was a ticking clock that only fools ignored. Three-Eye Atlas did not end the story. It began the countdown, and the universe, patient as ever, has been letting us hear the seconds fall. What if silence has flavors? What if not all stillness is the same, and some silences weigh heavier, stranger, more deliberate than others? After Three-Eye Atlas, the sky returned to quiet. But it was not the same quiet as before. It was a pause that felt unnatural. The first silence, after ʻOumuamua, had been denial. Perhaps it was a fluke, an anomaly, a one-time visitor. The second silence, after Borisov, had been anticipation. Surely another would come soon. But the third silence, after Three-Eye Atlas, was different. It did not feel accidental. It felt staged. Astronomers had never been better prepared. Telescopes scanned more sky than ever. Automated surveys flagged anomalies in near real time. Networks of observatories coordinated across continents. If interstellar objects were as common as the first three suggested, then another should have appeared quickly. But nothing came. The silence stretched, day after day, year after year, and with each passing season, the quiet felt heavier. Scientists argued over what the pause meant. Some said it was natural correction, a statistical lull after an unusual cluster of detections. Others whispered of choreography. 3 in quick succession, then nothing. It feels like rhythm, one astronomer admitted privately. The pause, they suggested, might not be absence. It might be emphasis. The idea unsettled many. If silence could be deliberate, then who or what was shaping it? Was the pause a test, watching how humanity would respond? Was it camouflage, hiding the presence of other objects in ways we had not yet learned to detect? Or was it a warning, a deliberate gap inserted into the rhythm to make the next arrival hit harder? Meanwhile, the quiet corroded confidence. Funding committees began to hesitate. Perhaps the interstellar era is over, they muttered. Perhaps the 3 visitors were rare luck. Some scientists fought back fiercely, pointing to improved detection systems. The next is coming, they said. The silence is countdown. But the longer nothing appeared, the harder it was to convince anyone. For the public, the pause was convenient. The story faded. Life continued without disruption. The messengers became footnotes. But for those who watched the sky, the quiet was unbearable. They refreshed logs compulsively, hunting for anomalies that never arrived. Each empty frame felt suspicious. Silence, once background, had become signal. What if silence itself is part of the curriculum? A teacher pauses between questions to see if the student is paying attention. A storyteller pauses to build suspense before the next act. A predator pauses in the forest to listen before striking. Perhaps the pause after Three-Eye Atlas was not absence, but strategy. And if it was strategy, then what was being measured? Our patience? Our preparation? Our discipline? Did we build interceptors, refine telescopes, connect our networks, or did we sink back into denial? The pause, unnatural as it felt, may have been designed to reveal our character. For centuries, humanity thought silence was permanent. After 3 messengers, we knew it could break. But after the pause that followed, we learned something stranger. Silence can be sculpted. It can be shaped, timed, weighted. It can feel natural or unnatural. And when it feels unnatural, it forces us to lean forward, to question, to prepare. Perhaps that was the lesson of the pause. Not to trust silence, not to mistake stillness for safety. To understand that even quiet skies can be part of the message. What if we have misunderstood the very thing we trusted most? What if the quiet sky above us was never truly quiet, but filled with signals, patterns, and whispers that we lacked the patience to hear? Perhaps what we call silence is not absence, but language, an alphabet of stillness, a grammar of intervals, a story told in pauses. For centuries, humanity assumed the heavens were mute. Stars burned steadily. Planets circled predictably. Comets came and went on long arcs. The gaps between events were interpreted as nothing. Silence was background, the default state of the cosmos. But the arrival of ʻOumuamua, then Borisov, then 3i Atlas, shattered that illusion. They showed us that the sky is not still. It interrupts itself, it intrudes, it speaks, and the silences between those interruptions no longer feel neutral. They feel alive. Think of a teacher in a classroom. Sometimes, the most powerful moment is not the lecture, but the pause afterward, when students wrestle with the question. Think of a storyteller who lowers their voice, allowing the silence to stretch, so that when the next sentence comes, it lands harder. Think of a hunter in a forest who freezes, letting the stillness carry meaning. In all these cases, silence is not empty. It is strategy. It is message. What if the silence of the heavens works the same way? ʻOumuamua cracked it once, reminding us that not all shapes belong. Borisov cracked it again, reminding us that not all chemistry belongs. 3i Atlas cracked it a third time, reminding us that not all rules belong. And then came silence again, but this time, the pause felt intentional, a gap that seemed to underline the message instead of ending it. Scientists wrestled with this thought. It is only statistics, they insisted. Interstellar objects must be rare. The first three were luck, discovered during a golden age of improved surveys. The silence afterward was correction, but even as they spoke, they felt the unease. If silence is only random, why does it feel rhythmic? Why do the pauses heighten tension instead of relieving it? Why do we feel, instinctively, that quiet is counting down? Perhaps because silence has always been full of information. Consider the wow signal, the famous radio burst detected in 1977. It lasted only 72 seconds, then the cosmos went silent again. Some called it proof of intelligence. Others dismissed it as natural. But the silence afterward was louder than the signal. It suggested deliberation, a hint that meaning might live in absence as much as in presence. The same may be true for interstellar visitors. Perhaps the message is not in the bodies themselves, but in their timing. One comes in 2017, another in 2019, a third in 2024. Not evenly spaced, but close enough to feel deliberate. Then the silence. Was this sequence random, or was it designed to feel like escalation followed by suspense? What if the silence itself is part of the script? The possibility unsettles, because it forces us to question our assumptions about communication. We expect messages in beacons, signals, broadcasts. But what if the true message is the pattern of appearance and disappearance? What if the silence is punctuation? And then comes the most unsettling thought of all. If silence is not silence, then we have never been alone with our thoughts. Every blank night sky has been full of meaning. Every interval between visitors has been charged with potential. We have only failed to read it. 3i Atlas may have been less a messenger than a translator, reminding us that the universe does not only speak in light, but also in quiet. The silence was never absence. It was always conversation. What if silence was never broken by the sky, but by us? What if, long before 3i Atlas arrived, humanity had already announced itself across the void, leaking signals, scattering noise, broadcasting our existence, whether we intended to or not? Perhaps the greater mystery is not why the universe seems quiet, but why we believed we were hidden. For most of history, the Earth was silent in cosmic terms. Our fires, our voices, our wars left no mark beyond the thin layer of atmosphere above us. Then came radio. In the early 20th century, we built transmitters to carry music and voices across continents. We thought we were speaking to each other. In truth, we were whispering to the stars. Radio waves do not stop at borders. They do not bend around to stay with us. They rush outward, at the speed of light, carrying news bulletins, jazz songs, football scores, and propaganda speeches into the void. Every broadcast was a flare, every station a beacon. At first, the signals were strong, powerful military radars, designed to scan skies for threats, blasted bursts of energy, so fierce they could be detected from light years away. Early television towers leaked signals continuously, a glow of culture spreading into the cosmos. Even if no one was listening, we had already broken the silence. Our presence was written across the void in electromagnetic ink. Scientists called this the radio bubble, a sphere, now more than 100 light years across, expanding every day, filled with the faint, but undeniable noise of humanity. Within that bubble, any civilization with technology like ours could detect us. We had not kept quiet. We had shouted without meaning to, and so, when Three-Eye Atlas appeared, some wondered if the timing was coincidence. Had our noise reached ears we did not know existed? Had our careless broadcasts summoned the messengers? It was speculation, yes, but speculation that gnawed. For the first time in history, humanity began to question not only whether the universe was listening, but whether it had already responded. Attempts were made to quiet ourselves. Engineers built satellites with tighter beams, limiting leakage. Television moved to cable and fiber, reducing waste. But the damage was done. The noise was already out there, expanding farther with each year. Every attempt to hide felt like shutting a door after the house was already on fire. The universe already knew. What if this was the reason silence unsettled us so much after Three-Eye Atlas? Because deep down, we understood that the silence was not mutual. We were never quiet. We were never hidden. The messengers were not intruders. They were replies. And yet, even in this possibility, there is comfort. If the universe noticed, it has been patient. No catastrophe has followed. The silence remains, heavy but unbroken, as if waiting for us to mature. Perhaps Three-Eye Atlas was not a rival, but reminder, you are not as invisible as you think. The noise we could not hide continues to travel outward, carrying not only our science, but our flaws, our laughter, our music. In every direction, our presence expands, unstoppable. Even if we never send a deliberate message, even if we vow to remain silent, the truth is simple. We have already spoken. Perhaps the messengers are not warning us, but answering us. Perhaps Three-Eye Atlas came not to disturb the quiet, but to show us that the quiet was never ours to claim. What if the silence after Three-Eye Atlas was not emptiness, but observation? What if somewhere beyond our sight, in the dark between stars, there are watchers who prefer listening to speaking, patient presences that measure our every noise, weigh our every signal, and study our every response? Perhaps the quiet sky does not mean we are alone. Perhaps it means we are being watched. The thought unsettles because it reverses our assumption. We believe we are the ones searching, pointing telescopes outward, straining radios to catch faint signals. But what if we are not the hunters, but the quarry? What if the messengers that streaked across our sky were not accidents of orbit, but probes, instruments, or couriers dispatched by unseen watchers in the dark? ʻOumuamua, Borisov, Three-Eye Atlas, 3 anomalies in a short span of years. Were they random, or were they tests? Our ancestors already lived with this suspicion. They described comets as eyes, dragons, and serpents. They said the heavens were alive and aware. They believed intruders carried meaning. They were not far wrong. Today, we call them interstellar visitors, but the effect is the same. The sky is not passive, it looks back. What if the watchers are cautious, preferring silence over speech? Imagine a civilization older than ours by 1,000 millennia, one that has learned the danger of broadcasting. They would not shout into the void, they would wait. They would send scouts, fragments, wanderers disguised as comets, instruments disguised as ice. They would measure, record, observe, and remain silent. From our perspective, the heavens would look empty. From theirs, the silence would be cover. Three-Eye Atlas unsettled us because it did not behave like a local body. Its chemistry was alien, its ratios skewed. It looked like visitor, not neighbor. To us, it was anomaly. To the watchers, perhaps, it was ordinary, one of many couriers drifting across the galaxy. If so, then the real message of Three-Eye Atlas was not in its dust, but in its very presence, proof that silence is not absence, it is patience. Scientists hesitate to say this aloud, but the idea lingers. Why 3 so close together? Why none since? Why silence that feels like rhythm instead of chance? The simplest answer is randomness. But the human mind rebels against randomness, especially when the anomalies are so sharp, so unsettling. We look into the void and feel as though someone is there, waiting, and maybe that feeling is not wrong. If watchers exist, their silence is deliberate. They have no need to rush. They can afford to wait while we grow louder, while our noise expands, while our curiosity draws us further into space. They can afford to let us believe we are alone, right up until the moment they decide the silence should end. What unsettles us most is not the idea of aliens shouting, it is the idea of aliens listening. Shouting can be ignored. Listening cannot. Shouting is obvious. Listening is hidden. Shouting is careless. Listening is deliberate. If the watchers are real, then the universe is not quiet. It is attentive. 3i Atlas may have been one of their instruments. One more set of eyes in a cosmos, already filled with unseen gazes. The silence that followed may not be absence at all, but the pause of an audience waiting for the next act. Perhaps the watchers are in the dark, not because they cannot speak, but because they choose not to. And perhaps the true message of the third messenger was not its dust, its ratios, or its speed, but the reminder that silence itself can be gaze. What if the silence after 3i Atlas was not about the universe at all, but about us? What if the quiet sky did not reflect absence, but turned into a mirror, forcing humanity to confront its own noise, its own fears, and its own hunger for meaning? Perhaps the silence was never cosmic, it was personal. When the third messenger faded into the dark, astronomers were left with nothing but graphs and memory. The surveys continued, but the heavens gave no anomalies. The instruments stared at stars, but no strangers crossed their gaze. The silence became unbearable not because the sky was still, but because in that stillness, humanity saw itself reflected. We saw our impatience. After 3 visitors in such quick succession, we expected another. We demanded rhythm, cadence, answers. When none came, the absence revealed our restlessness. Silence taught us that we were not ready to wait. We saw our arrogance. For decades, we had spoken of ourselves as searchers, hunters, explorers of the cosmos. But the silence after 3i Atlas revealed that we were also desperate children, begging for attention, projecting meaning onto every comet, every signal. The sky did not reassure us, it held up a mirror and showed us how small we were. We saw our fear. The more we looked outward, the more we realized that our own noise was spilling into the void. Radio bubbles, satellite signals, radar bursts, all leaking into the dark. The silence reflected our unease. If we could not hide from ourselves, how could we ever hope to hide from others? Even our myths returned in the mirror. Medieval chroniclers feared comets as dragons and torches. Mesoamerican priests drew serpents of flame. Chinese astronomers described guest stars. In the silence after 3i Atlas, we realized we were no different. We, too, were projecting fear, cloaking ignorance in metaphor, reaching for language to contain what unsettled us. The silence made us timeless, echoing the same worries as every generation before us. Some argued that the silence was mercy. 3 anomalies in less than a decade had rattled us. Perhaps the universe was giving us space to breathe, to prepare, to mature before the next arrival. Others argued the silence was judgment. We had been shown the truth, and our failure to act, to build interceptors, to prepare missions, to confront the implications meant we had squandered the chance. The quiet, they said, was condemnation. But the most haunting thought was simpler. Perhaps the silence was not about the universe at all. Perhaps it was only reflection, a mirror so vast it stretched across the stars, showing us what we already knew, that we are impatient, arrogant, afraid, that we are still children in the cosmic dark, demanding answers we cannot yet bear to hear. 3i Atlas did not only break silence, it transformed it. It turned the quiet sky into a mirror, one we could not look away from, and in that mirror we saw not messengers, not watchers, not signals, but ourselves. What if the quiet sky above us now is not an ending, but a threshold? What if the years since 3i Atlas are not absence, but the breath before the next word, the pause before the fourth messenger arrives? Perhaps what feels like emptiness is really anticipation, the silence before the curtain rises again. Humanity has grown uneasy in this waiting. ʻOumuamua startled us. Borisov confirmed us. 3i Atlas unsettled us. 3 intruders in quick succession rewrote our understanding of the cosmos. And then, nothing. No new anomalies, no fresh visitors, only the steady pulse of stars and the predictable motion of planets. The silence stretches, and in its length, it becomes almost unbearable. Scientists do not treat it as final. Papers are written, models refined, survey pipelines upgraded. Every night, telescopes sweep vast swaths of the sky, recording streaks of satellites, flashes of meteors, the patient cycles of familiar comets. But no stranger appears. The absence feels deliberate. Some call it randomness. Others call it choreography. Everyone feels the tension. What if the pause is part of the message? Imagine a storyteller who slows before the final act, letting the hush grow heavy so that the next word will land like thunder. Imagine a musician who stops just before the crescendo, holding the audience breathless. Perhaps the silence before the fourth messenger is crafted the same way, the stillness designed to heighten our awareness, to sharpen our fear. The fourth messenger will not be met as the first three were. We are different now. We no longer see anomalies as accidents. We expect them. We have built telescopes with wider fields, algorithms with faster eyes. We have drawn up blueprints for interceptors that could chase a visitor, sample its dust, even drill into its skin. When the next comes, and it will, we will not only watch, we will pursue it. And yet, the silence gnaws because we do not know what shape the fourth will take. ʻOumuamua defied our sense of form. Borisov defied our sense of chemistry. 3. Atlas defied our sense of probability. Each one broke a rule we thought unbreakable. What rule will the next one shatter? Will it be size so massive we cannot ignore it? Will it be clear so close we cannot dismiss it? Or will it be a message so deliberate we cannot deny it? Perhaps the fourth messenger is already inbound, hidden in the glare of the sun, disguised among countless asteroids, or still so far away it glows only faintly. Perhaps it has already been seen and dismissed, its strangeness lost in noise. Or perhaps it waits for the right moment, the silence stretched to its longest measure, so that when it finally breaks, the sound will echo across generations. The most unsettling thought is this: what if the silence is not a pause, but a test? What if the universe is watching to see how we prepare in the absence of crisis? Will we sharpen our tools, refine our patience, and meet the fourth messenger with readiness? Or will we grow complacent, treating silence as comfort once more, unlearning the lessons of the first three? The silence before the fourth messenger is the heaviest silence yet. It does not reassure me, it does not soothe. It hangs, dense and deliberate, like the breath before revelation. And in that stillness, one truth becomes impossible to escape. The sky has not finished speaking. It is only waiting for the right moment to begin again. What if the most unsettling sound in the universe is silence? What if the quiet sky above us, after the blaze of 3i Atlas faded, was not comfort but warning? Imagine this: 3 visitors in quick succession, ʻOumuamua, Borisov, and then 3i Atlas. 3 strangers in the span of only a few years. And then, nothing. No new light, no strange intruder. Just silence. Too much silence. Doesn't that feel wrong? Doesn't that feel staged? The first silence, after ʻOumuamua, could be dismissed. Maybe it was a fluke, a once-in-a-century accident. The second silence, after Borisov, felt lighter, almost expectant. Surely, there would be another soon. But the third silence, the silence that followed 3i Atlas, was different, heavier, stranger. It didn't feel like chance. It felt like choreography, as if someone had closed the curtain deliberately. What if silence itself is the message? A teacher pauses, not to end the lesson, but to make the student think. A storyteller pauses, not because the story is finished, but because the next act will strike harder. A hunter pauses in the woods, not because nothing is happening, but because something is listening. So, what if the stillness after 3i Atlas was not absence at all, but design? Astronomers felt it first. Their instruments, primed by the excitement of 3 messengers, now scanned empty skies. Survey pipelines flagged nothing unusual. Every night, the heavens looked ordinary. Planets circled. Stars burned steadily. On paper, everything was normal. But inside the observatories, the quiet grew unbearable. Scientists whispered to each other, "Why nothing? Why now?" Some even admitted, "It feels like waiting. It feels like a countdown." What if each blank night sky is not void, but tick, 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 an invisible clock, measuring down to the next arrival? The absence triggered 2 opposite fears. One fear was famine, that nothing more would ever come, that the three messengers were all we'd get, that the story ended with questions, never answers. But the other fear was flood, that something even bigger, even stranger, is already inbound, rushing toward us from the dark. Which is worse, to never see another messenger or to know the next one is on its way? For the public, the silence allowed forgetting. The news cycle moved on. Politicians shouted louder than the stars. But for the few who had studied 3i Atlas closely, the quiet was torture. They refreshed survey logs compulsively, hunting for streaks of light that did not belong. Rumours spread through back channels. Have you heard? A faint mover. Too fast. Too strange. And then, always, the correction. False alarm. Just a satellite. Just noise. Each rumour became rehearsal. Each disappointment became paranoia. What if paranoia is exactly the point? What if the silence is not accidental, not random, but deliberate? A silence sculpted to unsettle, to force us into preparation, to make us sharper, more disciplined, more alert. Because silence, used correctly, is a weapon. It keeps you leaning forward, it keeps you waiting, it keeps you awake. And maybe that's the lesson. Maybe 3i Atlas was not the final messenger. Maybe it was only rehearsal. Maybe the real message comes not in the blaze of a comet's tail, but in the tension of the silence that follows. So listen closely. The sky above you looks quiet tonight. Too quiet. The question is not if silence will break. The question is when. What if the most unsettling sound in the universe is silence? What if the quiet sky above us, after the blaze of 3i Atlas faded, was not comfort but warning? Picture it. 3 visitors in quick succession, ʻOumuamua, Borisov, and then 3i Atlas. 3 strangers in the span of only a few years. Each one shook our certainty. Each one reminded us that the sky is not sealed. And then, nothing. No new light, no strange intruder, just silence. Too much silence. Silence that felt like a door locked shut. Doesn't that seem wrong? Doesn't it feel staged? The first silence, after ʻOumuamua, could be dismissed. People said it was a fluke, an accident of chance, a shard of rock caught in our net. The second silence, after Borisov, felt easier, almost expectant. Surely another would follow. Surely this was a rhythm. But the silence that came after 3i Atlas was different. It was heavier, stranger. It felt like a curtain pulled down too deliberately, as though something out there had chosen to pause. What if silence itself is the message? Think of a teacher, pausing mid-sentence to see if the student understands. Think of a storyteller, letting silence stretch before the next chapter, knowing the absence will sharpen the listener's attention. Think of a hunter in the woods, halting not because the forest is empty, but because something is watching. So what if the silence, after 3i Atlas, was not emptiness at all, but design? Astronomers were the first to feel it. Their instruments, still buzzing with the echoes of the third messenger, now scanned skies that returned nothing unusual. Survey pipelines flagged only satellites, ordinary asteroids, familiar comets. Night after night, the heavens behaved with unnerving calm. Stars burned steadily, planets circled predictably. On paper, everything was normal. But inside observatories, the quiet grew unbearable. Researchers whispered, "Why nothing? Why now?" Some admitted aloud, "It feels like waiting, it feels like a countdown." What if they were right? What if every blank night sky is not empty, but tick, 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 an invisible clock marking down toward the next arrival? The absence stirred 2 opposite fears. One was famine, that nothing more would ever come. That ʻOumuamua, Borisov, and 3i Atlas were the whole story. That we had been given only 3 riddles and then cut off forever, left with questions without answers. The other was flood, the fear that something even larger, even stranger, is already inbound. A body that will blaze across our skies too undeniably to ignore, and perhaps too dangerously to survive. Which is worse, to be abandoned in silence or to be chosen for confrontation? For most of the world, silence was a relief. People forgot. The news cycle moved on. Politicians and celebrities shouted louder than the stars. But for those who had studied 3i Atlas closely, the quiet was torment. They refreshed survey logs compulsively. Long after midnight, scanning for streaks of light that did not belong. Rumors spread through back channels. Have you heard? A faint mover. Too fast, too strange. For a moment, anticipation would blaze again. And then came the correction. False alarm. Just a satellite. Just noise. Each rumor became rehearsal. Each disappointment sharpened paranoia. And yet, what if paranoia is not mistake but training? What if the silence is not accident, not chance, but deliberate? A silence sculpted to unsettle, to force us into vigilance, to sharpen our instincts. Because silence, when wielded with intent, is a weapon. It keeps you leaning forward. It keeps you waiting. It keeps you awake. Think of how quickly the silence after 3I Atlas reshaped our response. Proposals for ready-to-launch interceptors gained momentum. Telescopes were connected into global networks, designed to pivot the moment an anomaly appeared. Agencies began to speak differently. They stopped saying, if. They started saying, when. Silence had pushed them into discipline. Maybe that was the point all along. Maybe the lesson of 3I Atlas is not only in its alien chemistry, but in the silence it left behind. The comet itself was a messenger, but the silence was message too. A pause written across the sky to test us, to measure how we would react. Would we grow complacent? Would we fall back into forgetting? Or would we stay alert, preparing for the inevitable break? The longer the silence stretched, the more unbearable it became. After ʻOumuamua, we thought we were lucky to have seen even one. After Borisov, we thought we had entered a new age of discovery. After 3I Atlas, we thought the floodgates had opened. But when the gates slammed shut, the quiet no longer felt like rest. It felt like suspense. The silence was not background anymore. It was foreground. It was the story itself. And what if silence is more dangerous than noise? A loud event you can explain, a visible visitor you can measure. But silence is slippery. It corrodes confidence. It whispers doubts. It makes every empty night feel suspicious. Every blank survey frame feels staged. Silence is not absence. It is pressure. Perhaps that is the true message of the third messenger, that the sky is alive not only in its intrusions, but in its pauses. The silence is part of the performance. The stillness between messengers is not void. It is stagecraft. It is rehearsal. It is preparation. Listen closely. Tonight the sky looks quiet. Too quiet. The question is not if silence will break. The question is when. And when it does, will we be ready? Or will we discover that the silence was never silence at all, but the loudest warning the universe could give? What if the silence after 3I Atlas was never about the universe at all, but about us? What if the quiet sky did not signal absence, but turned into a mirror, reflecting our own noise, our own fears, and our hunger for meaning? Maybe the silence was not cosmic, but personal. Maybe what unsettled us most was not the void above, but the reflection it threw back down onto Earth. When the third messenger faded, astronomers were left with nothing but graphs and memory. The telescopes kept watching, the survey networks kept scanning, but nothing unusual appeared. The heavens gave no anomaly, no foreign visitor, no fresh disruption. All that remained was silence. But the silence did not feel empty. It felt like interrogation. It forced us to stare at ourselves. Look closely, and you see impatience. After 3 visitors in such quick succession, humanity expected another. We demanded rhythm, a cadence, a fourth act in the unfolding play. And when none came, the absence became unbearable. The silence exposed our restlessness. We had grown addicted to anomaly. We could not endure stillness. That impatience was a reflection of who we are, a species that cannot sit quietly in the dark without whispering, "When's the next one?" Look again, and you see arrogance. For decades, we imagined ourselves as the hunters of the cosmos, the explorers, the searchers, the questioners. But the silence after 3I Atlas revealed a different truth. We were not confident hunters. We were desperate children, begging for attention. Every time a comet blazed or a rumor spread of an unusual object, we projected meaning onto it, grasping for certainty. The sky was quiet, but the mirror it held showed us our own neediness. We did not want answers. We wanted reassurance. And deeper still, you see fear. Because as the silence stretched, we remembered that we are not the quiet ones. We are loud. Our planet bleeds radio into the void. Our radar pulses, our television broadcasts, our satellite chatter, all of it leaking outward, unstoppable, expanding into the dark. We had already broken the silence long ago, whether we meant to or not. The mirror of the quiet sky reminded us of this. We were never hidden. And if we are not hidden, then perhaps we are not alone. It is an unsettling reflection. We wanted the silence to soothe us, but it became a mirror that stripped away illusions. It reminded us of our impatience, our arrogance, and our fear. And in doing so, it tied us to every generation that came before. Because we were not the first to look at a quiet sky and panic. The medieval monks who drew comets as dragons were doing the same. The Mesoamerican priests who described smoking serpents were doing the same. The Chinese astronomers who wrote of guest stars were doing the same. The silence made us timeless. It showed us that our fears have never changed. Some argued that the silence was mercy. After 3 messengers so close together, perhaps the universe was giving us space to breathe, to prepare, to mature before the next arrival. But others argued the silence was judgment. We had been shown the truth, and we had done nothing. We had not built interceptors. We had not prepared missions. We had not answered the questions. The silence was not gift. It was condemnation, a reflection of failure, and yet, maybe the most haunting possibility was the simplest, that the silence was only reflection, that it was nothing more than a vast mirror hung across the stars, showing us what we already knew but did not wish to face, that we are impatient, arrogant, and afraid, that we are still children in the dark, whispering stories to calm ourselves, waiting for a knock we both dread and desire. So, perhaps 3i Atlas did not only break silence, perhaps it transformed it. The third messenger turned the night sky into a mirror, and in that mirror we saw not messengers, not watchers, not omens, but ourselves. The silence was not empty, it was a reflection, and that reflection was far more terrifying than any comet's tail. Because here is the thought that lingers. What if the mirror never lies? What if the quiet above us will always force us to see who we really are, no matter how hard we try to look away? What if humanity was never silent? What if, long before 3i Atlas crossed our skies, we had already broken the stillness of the cosmos with our own voices broadcasting our existence, whether we meant to or not? Perhaps the greater mystery is not why the universe seems quiet, but why we ever believed we were hidden. For most of history, Earth was truly silent. Our fires, our music, our wars, none of it reached beyond the thin veil of our atmosphere. The planet whispered only in the faint radio waves of lightning and aurora. To the wider cosmos, we were invisible. But in the early 20th century, something shifted. We built transmitters. Towers rose. Antennas began to hum. At first, the signals were meant only for us, for ships at sea, for voices across a continent, for music carried from one city to the next. But the universe does not obey borders. Radio waves do not stop at the horizon. They stream outward, slipping past clouds and mountains, past the edge of atmosphere, into the dark between stars. Every broadcast became a flare. Every station, a beacon. The first was faint, fragile, Morse code bursts, dots and dashes dissolving into static. Then came voices, jazz songs, news bulletins, political speeches, laughter, propaganda, cheers from stadiums. The sound of a species learning how to speak not only to itself, but to everything else. Our intentions were local. Our reach was infinite. Without meaning to, we had broken the silence forever. By the middle of the century, the signals grew stronger. Military radars swept the skies with beams so powerful they could be detected from light years away. Early television towers poured energy upward without restraint. Each frequency was a fingerprint of our time, our languages, our cultures, our fears, our dreams. We had drawn a glowing bubble around ourselves, a sphere of noise expanding outward at the speed of light. Today, that bubble stretches more than 100 light-years across, carrying fragments of us into the void. Within it, any civilization with instruments as crude as our own could already know we exist. And here is the unsettling thought. What if 3i Atlas was not an intruder, but an answer? What if the messengers were never accidents of orbit, but replies to the noise we have been sending for over a century? The timing is suggestive. Our first strong transmissions left Earth in the 1900s 1,930 seconds, and 1,940 seconds. By now, they have reached hundreds of stars. Is it coincidence that our first confirmed interstellar visitors appeared only decades later? Or is it choreography? The silence above us made us believe we were alone. But the rustling memory of Earth says otherwise. We have been shouting for generations, and only now do we realize what we have done. Scientists gave this sphere a name, the radio bubble, a simple term for something profound, a halo of culture expanding into space, unstoppable, eternal. Inside that bubble are old speeches, forgotten songs, commercials for products that no longer exist. Alien ears, if they are listening, would hear not only who we are now, but who we were long ago. Our childhood is preserved in electromagnetic fossils. Some say it is harmless. The signals are weak, diffused by distance, drowned by cosmic noise. Others argue they are strong enough. A single military radar pulse, sharp and focused, is brighter than a star for an instant. It does not matter how faint our broadcasts grow with distance. If someone wants to hear us, they can. We already announced ourselves. So the mirror of silence reflected something darker, our lack of control. We thought we could choose when to speak to the universe, sending careful messages through projects like SETI, crafting deliberate greetings on plaques and golden records. But those were rituals. The truth is that we had already spoken, not once, not carefully, but endlessly, carelessly, constantly. We told the universe about ourselves, without consent, without plan, without understanding. The noise was already out there, expanding farther every day. What if this is why the silence feels heavier after 3i Atlas? Because deep down, we know the silence is not mutual. We are not quiet. We are not hidden. We are already exposed. The silence above is not the silence of absence. It is the silence of waiting. And that silence sharpens into question. Who is listening? Who, inside that 100-light-year bubble, has already heard us? Who has measured our signals, decoded our voices, replayed our laughter in alien rooms? Who has weighed us, judged us, and chosen not to respond? It is easy to imagine indifference. Maybe they hear us and simply do not care. It is easier still to imagine caution. Maybe they hear us and choose silence, because silence is safer than speech. But the most haunting thought is that maybe they have already answered. Maybe ʻOumuamua, Borisov, and 3i Atlas were not visitors of chance, but messengers of reply. If so, then the silence that followed is not absence, it is observation. The watchers may not shout, they may not sing, they may not send greetings, they may prefer to listen, to measure our patience, to see how we behave once we know we are no longer alone. The rustling memory of Earth cannot be undone. Our noise has already left us. Every second, it carries more of us outward. More stars fall inside our reach. More civilizations, if they exist, will hear us. Even if we went dark tomorrow, if we silenced every tower, every radar, every transmitter, the bubble would keep expanding, carrying our past with it. We cannot take it back. Perhaps that is the truest reflection of all. The silence above is not the silence of the cosmos. It is the silence of a classroom. After a student blurts out a secret too loudly, too suddenly, the universe has heard, and now it waits. So when we look up at the quiet sky, maybe the question is not whether anyone is out there. Maybe the question is how long they have been listening. What if the silence after 3i Atlas is not silence at all, but gaze? What if the quiet sky above us is not empty, but crowded with watchers, patient presences that choose to listen rather than speak? We imagine ourselves as the searchers, the hunters, pointing telescopes outward, straining radios for faint signals. But what if we are not the hunters at all? What if we are the quarry? Think of it. 3 anomalies in less than a decade. ʻOumuamua, long and thin, refusing to behave like asteroid or comet. Borisov, a frozen traveller whose chemistry betrayed alien origin. 3i Atlas, stranger still, faster, older, with a recipe that made no sense. To us, these were riddles. To them, perhaps, they were instruments. Probes drifting through the galaxy, disguised as natural bodies, slipping into solar systems unnoticed. A courier here, an observer there, vanishing back into the dark. Were these objects truly random, or were they tests? Our ancestors already carried this suspicion. They looked at comets and described them as eyes, dragons, serpents. They sensed awareness in the heavens. They believed intruders carried meaning, and maybe they were closer to the truth than we are willing to admit. We call them interstellar objects, but the effect is the same. They remind us that the sky is not passive. It looks back. Imagine a civilization older than ours by 1,000 millennia. Such a people would not waste their time shouting into the void. They would have learned the danger of broadcasting. Noise reveals position. Silence protects it. If they exist, they would prefer quiet. They would not scatter signals across the stars like seeds. They would send scouts, probes, wanderers disguised as comets. They would measure, record, observe, and remain silent. From our perspective, the sky would look empty. From theirs, it would look full. And here is the unsettling thought. What if 3I Atlas was one of theirs? Not an accident of orbit, but a tool. Not a comet, but a courier. Its strange chemistry may have been natural, or it may have been signature. Ratios skewed deliberately, like code carved in ice. A message hidden in dust, waiting for us to notice. We saw anomaly. They saw communication. We saw accident. They saw report. The silence that followed becomes harder to explain. Too neat, too rhythmic. 3 visitors in such quick succession, then nothing. It feels like choreography, as if someone is waiting to see how we react. Will we dismiss them? Will we panic? Will we prepare? The pause itself begins to feel like a test. Astronomers whisper this fear. They rarely say it aloud, but in quiet corners it surfaces. Why 3 so close together? Why none since? What if it isn't random? The simplest answer is chance. The human mind rebels against chance. We do not believe in silence when it feels so deliberate. So what if the watchers are real? Not because they speak, but because they don't. Silence can be camouflage. Silence can be gaze. If you want to study an animal, you do not announce yourself with drums. You sit still in the dark and wait. Perhaps the universe is already full of stillness that is not absence, but attention. Perhaps the sky above is an audience watching us perform. And if that is true, what have they seen? They have watched us discover fire, carve stone, build cities. They have watched us climb into the air, then into orbit. They have watched our radio bubble swell outward, carrying laughter and propaganda, jazz and static, into their night. They have watched us split the atom, scorch forests, drain oceans. They have watched us point telescopes outward, desperate to know if we are alone, never considering that the question may have already been answered by their gaze. What if the waiting eyes are not indifferent? What if they are patient? Patient enough to let us reveal ourselves. Patient enough to wait until we cross the threshold. Until we are ready to hear silence for what it truly is, not emptiness, but presence. The most unsettling part is not the idea of aliens shouting. It is the idea of aliens listening. Shouting is obvious. Listening is hidden. Shouting is careless. Listening is deliberate. And if someone is listening, then every broadcast we have ever made was not just noise, but confession. Every frequency was testimony. Every signal, a diary. So perhaps the third messenger was not accident at all. Perhaps it was demonstration, a reminder that the watchers do not need to speak. They only need to arrive. To brush our system once, long enough to unsettle. To vanish again, long enough to sharpen paranoia. To leave silence behind like a weight. A silence heavy with gaze. The night sky looks quiet now, too quiet. But imagine if silence is not the stillness of an empty room. Imagine if silence is the hush of an audience. Imagine if every star above you is a watcher's eye, waiting for the next act of our story. Maybe that is the true legacy of 3I Atlas. Not its chemistry, not its orbit, but the fear it left us with, that the silence is not ours, that it belongs to them, that the quiet is not emptiness, but attention. And the question that lingers is simple and terrible. How long have they been watching? What if the heavens had their own pope, not one who ruled from marble halls or golden thrones, but one who ruled in silence, sending decrees not through parchment or ink, but through streaks of fire across the night sky? What if the comets that terrified kings and peasants alike were not accidents of nature, but pronouncements from above, commands written in flame, judgments carved into silence? In the Middle Ages, The authority of heaven was not questioned. The church claimed dominion over souls, kings claimed dominion over land, but the sky itself held dominion over both. A comet appearing suddenly was not just spectacle, it was authority. Priests would preach of God's wrath. Kings would tremble, wondering if their reign had been condemned. Popes would issue prayers and decrees to ward off the influence of the fire above. The heavens themselves were the true Pope, absolute, untouchable, beyond argument. Think of 1456. A comet blazed across the sky, brighter than any memory could recall. It was Halley's comet, though they did not know its name. It stretched across Europe like a burning spear, and terror followed it. Pope Calixtus III declared special prayers to protect Christendom from its influence, linking it to the Ottoman threat at the gates of Europe. To the people below, the comet was both heavenly and political, both omen and decree. The sky had spoken, and men scrambled to interpret its words. What if Three-Eye Atlas was part of the same authority? What if interstellar messengers are not accidents, but proclamations? Their appearance forces us to bow, not to priests or kings, but to the heavens themselves. They remind us that silence can shatter at any moment, and when it does, it rewrites the order of the world below. Throughout history, rulers tried to claim comets for their own. Chinese emperors employed entire teams of astronomers to track guest stars and interpret their meaning, binding their authority to heaven's judgment. If the stars promised prosperity, the emperor declared it proof of his mandate. If the stars warned of disaster, he declared it was a warning to his enemies. In both cases, the heavens were the true ruler, the emperor only its interpreter. The same was true in Europe. Chronicles describe kings consulting astrologers when comets appeared, fearful of rebellion, invasion, or plague. Monarchs draped themselves in symbols of divine order, yet their power cracked whenever the heavens broke silence. A fiery torch in the sky could undermine armies, topple certainty, and turn loyal subjects into fearful conspirators. The Pope of the heavens always outranked the crowns of earth, and here is the hook. What if that hierarchy never ended? What if even today, when Three-Eye Atlas appeared, streaking into our instruments with alien chemistry, we felt the same ancient tremor? Scientists wrote papers, observatories debated ratios and trajectories, but beneath the technical words, the reaction was instinctive. A visitor had arrived, uninvited. The order of the heavens had shifted. Our authority was not absolute. The sky had spoken. Maybe that is the true meaning of prophecy. Not specific predictions of plague or famine, but the unshakable reminder that the heavens rule us, not the other way around. Each messenger is a papal bull written in light, a decree that we cannot overturn. In Mesoamerica, comets were drawn as serpents trailing smoke, divine commands that demanded offerings and ceremonies. In Persia, scholars described flames from beyond the spheres, heavenly warnings that no ruler could ignore. Across continents and centuries, the pattern repeats. The heavens speak, and humans bend. The Pope of the heavens needed no cathedral. Its cathedral was the sky itself. So when Three-Eye Atlas flared and faded, what decree did it bring? Some said it was a messenger of inevitability, proof that silence cannot be trusted. Others whispered it was a rehearsal, preparing us for a greater judgment yet to come. The truth is not in the comet itself, but in the unease it left behind. Authority had been reminded. The Pope of the heavens had issued its warning. You are not in control. And what of the silence that followed? Was it excommunication? A refusal to send further messages until we proved worthy of the ones already delivered? Or was it the calm before the next decree, the pause before a judgment too large to mistake? The sky may be silent now, but history teaches that silence never lasts. The Pope of the heavens always returns. The unsettling thought is this: what if humanity has no choice but to obey? What if every fiery visitor, every interstellar wanderer, is not only anomaly, but order commands from the true throne above, reminding us that our crowns, our science, our pride are temporary? The silence after Three-Eye Atlas is not comfort, it is suspense, it is the hush before the next pronouncement. So look up tonight at the quiet sky. It may seem calm, it may seem neutral, but remember this: the Pope of the heavens does not need to speak often. When it does, the world below bends. And one day, perhaps soon, the silence will break again, not with words, but with flame. What if the sky is not chaos, but language? What if every comet, every flare, every pause of silence is not random, but part of an alphabet so vast we have only just begun to read its letters? We have always assumed that the universe speaks through stars and galaxies, through the roar of supernovae and the rhythm of planets. But what if its truest grammar is quieter, stranger written in visitors that come once, vanish forever, and leave us with the uneasy sense that we have just read a word we do not understand? ʻOumuamua was the first letter. Long, thin, tumbling through the void, refusing every category we tried to fit it into. It was not asteroid, it was not comet, it was anomaly. A character we could not pronounce, but one that forced us to admit the alphabet existed. Borisov was the second letter. A comet by shape, but alien by recipe. Its chemistry belonged to another kitchen, another star, another world. A consonant from a foreign tongue, carrying accents we had never heard. And then came 3i Atlas, the third letter. Faster, older, stranger. Its very dust felt like punctuation. A curve or mark designed not to explain, but to unsettle. 3 letters strung together in a way that felt less like accident and more like message. What if that was the point? What if the universe has always spoken, not through long speeches, but through fragments, letters scattered across centuries, words broken apart by time, sentences stretched across millennia? Our ancestors may have suspected it. Chinese astronomers called them guest stars, as if they knew they were not permanent residents, but visitors spelling something brief. Persian texts describe stones from beyond the fixed stars, like single characters plucked from a script we could not read. Norse sagas spoke of fiery serpents winding across the heavens, dragons whose curling tails looked like letters painted on night's black page. Again and again, the metaphors circle the same idea. The sky is not mute, it is written, but here is the rehook. What if silence itself is part of the alphabet? Not the absence of letters, but the space between them, the punctuation that gives shape to meaning. A pause can be as significant as a word. A comma is not emptiness, it is structure. The silence after 3i Atlas may not be the end of the message. It may be the spacing between words, a deliberate pause before the next letter arrives. We mistake silence for conclusion, but what if it is only breath? A storyteller does not speak without rhythm. A teacher does not write without spacing. Perhaps the universe is doing the same, using intervals as part of its script. The years between messengers are not void. They are grammar. They are rhythm. Think of the Library of Babel, Borges's imagined archive, where every possible book exists, filled with infinite combinations of letters. Most are nonsense, but some are words, some are meaning. The sky may be the same. Thousands of comets and meteors streak through space like random text, most without message. But then, every so often, a letter appears that feels too sharp, too deliberate, too strange to dismiss. We do not yet know the language, but we know enough to recognize when we are being addressed. And what of the myths that call these visitors messengers? The Aztecs spoke of smoking stars as heralds of upheaval. Medieval monks drew comets as torches of judgment. Kepler, cautious yet bold, called them guests of the solar system. Different tongues, same instinct. These were not mere stones, they were words. So what word did 3i Atlas spell? Was it warning? Was it rehearsal? Was it simply the reminder that silence is not to be trusted? We cannot say for sure, but perhaps we were never meant to. Perhaps the alphabet of the heavens was never designed to be read easily. Perhaps it was designed to teach patience. That patience is unbearable. We live in a culture of instant messages, instant translations, instant answers. The cosmic alphabet is slower. It stretches across centuries. One letter here, another there, a silence lasting generations. To us, the gaps feel eternal. To the universe, they are only commas. And yet, the more we think about it, the heavier the question becomes. How many letters have we already missed? How many fiery strangers crossed our sky in centuries when no one was watching, or when their records burned in forgotten libraries? Perhaps half the alphabet is already lost. Perhaps we are piecing together a broken language, trying to read a sentence from which most of the letters have vanished. That is why silence unsettles. It is not just absence, it is uncertainty. We do not know if we are at the end of a sentence, or in the middle of a word, or waiting for the alphabet to resume. The quiet sky tonight may be a period, or it may be nothing more than a pause before the next character is written. The unsettling thought is this: what if meaning is not in the letters themselves, but in the fact that they appear at all? What if the true message is not hidden in ratios or orbits, but in rhythm? 3 anomalies in such short succession, then silence. That feels like structure. That feels like language. Perhaps one day we will learn to read the alphabet of the sky. Perhaps one day, centuries from now, the scattered letters of visitors like 3i Atlas will form a word we finally recognize. Until then, all we can do is listen and wait. And remember that silence is not empty, it is spacing. The stars are not mute, they are written. And one day, we may learn to read them. What if prophecy was never imagination, but memory disguised as vision? What if the predictions scattered through old manuscripts and myths were not wild guesses, but shadows cast forward in time by things already seen, already feared, already half understood? We dismiss prophecies as superstition. But what if they were not prophecy at all? What if they were history wearing the mask of the future? Across cultures, the same warnings repeat. A fiery serpent stretching across the heavens before the end of days. A smoking star before famine. A sudden torch before plague. To medieval scribes, these were omens. To kings, they were threats. To priests, they were messages from God. Yet they sound uncannily like the same intruders we have only just begun to confirm. ʻOumuamua, Borisov, 3i Atlas, visitors unbound, arriving once, leaving forever. Perhaps the so-called prophets were not looking ahead at all, but looking back, preserving fragments of memory in words that would outlast the generations. Kepler's writings are proof of this shadow at work. In the early 1600s, he dared to describe comets as guests of the solar system. He could not prove their origin, but he sensed it. Guests do not belong. Guests arrive unannounced. Guests eventually leave. Centuries before telescopes tracked interstellar wanderers, Kepler had already placed the word on the page. Newton, too, stared into the blaze of the 1680 comet and found its orbit, refusing to obey. He bent it into his laws, but privately admitted unease. Some comets, he confessed, might come from infinite space. What he called infinite space, we now call interstellar. Long before 3i Atlas, Newton had already glimpsed its shadow. Other shadows lie scattered across older centuries. A 12th century Persian text describes a stone from beyond the fixed stars, travelling in haste, shining but not burning. In Cairo, an Arabic manuscript records a wandering star that knew no master, that would not return. The Aztecs wrote of smoking serpents racing across the night before collapse. In the Norse sagas, a fiery serpent heralds Ragnarök, the unravelling of the world. These were not inventions. They were attempts to translate something seen and feared bodies that appeared once, then never again. Visitors that did not fit the cycles of the heavens. Messengers that slipped away into silence, leaving only shadows behind. The unsettling part is that none of these accounts required foresight. They required only observation. A comet, too strange to classify, too sudden to forget. A trail of flame crossing the night sky, leaving generations with unease too strong to keep silent. They carved it into prophecy, not to predict the future, but to remind the future of the past. When 3i Atlas blazed into our century, it felt like revelation. Perhaps it was only confirmation of a warning preserved for us long ago. And what if the same thing is happening now? When astronomers describe ʻOumuamua as unlike anything they had seen, or Borisov as chemistry alien to our system, or 3i Atlas as resisting every category, are they not creating the same kind of shadow? Centuries from now, when our data has burned, when our words are all that remain, these phrases may be read as prophecy. They will say, there were 3 visitors. The first refused to belong. The second carried alien fire. The third broke silence again. Our words will linger as shadows, waiting for the 4th. It may be that prophecy has never been about looking ahead. It has always been about carrying memory forward, a cycle written in unease. One generation sees, the next generation interprets, the next forgets. Centuries pass, then another messenger arrives, and suddenly the old warnings are read as foresight. But they were never foresight, they were memory, stretched across time like a shadow. 3. Atlas did not arrive alone. It arrived with all of those shadows in its tail. It was the latest confirmation of what had always been whispered. The sky is not sealed. Silence cannot be trusted. Visitors will return. The prophecies were not wrong. They were simply misunderstood. And now, as silence falls again, the shadow stretches forward once more. We do not know if the next visitor will arrive in a year or in a century, but when it does, the shadows will awaken. Old words will resurface. Old omens will be read again. People will say the prophets were right. Perhaps they were. Perhaps they always were. The question is not whether the next visitor will come. The question is how long its shadow has already been with us. What if 3 was never the ending? What if the appearance of ʻOumuamua, Borisov, and 3 Atlas was not a trilogy complete, but only the beginning of a longer sentence, a prelude to a 4th sign that has yet to arrive? Numbers carry meaning in every culture. 1 is chance, 2 is pattern, 3 is destiny, but 4 is completion. 4 is the seal. 4 is the point when a rhythm becomes undeniable. What if the silence after 3 Atlas is not conclusion, but pause waiting for the 4th to break it? The first 3 shook us. ʻOumuamua bent categories. Borisov carried the chemistry of another world. 3 Atlas came faster and stranger still. Each messenger escalated the unease. Each one widened the crack in our certainty. If the rhythm continues, the 4th cannot be ordinary. It must be stranger. It must be final. It must be the sign that silences doubt forever. Ancient cultures spoke of signs in numbers. The Mayans described cycles of 4 ages, each ending with cosmic upheaval. The Norse foresaw 3 winters before Ragnarok, and then a 4th that would not end. In Christian scripture, the 4th horseman of the apocalypse does not announce, he concludes. To them, 4 was not random, it was culmination. And so, the question lingers. Are we still in the middle of a cycle, waiting for its end? The silence unsettles because it feels like tension, not emptiness. Like the air before a storm, or the stillness before an earthquake. The absence of a 4th visitor feels less like resolution and more like countdown. Astronomers whisper it among themselves, 3 in a handful of years, then none. Too neat, too sharp, too deliberate. If another arrives, the sequence will be undeniable. If it doesn't, the silence itself becomes the 4th sign. Either way, the pattern closes. What would the 4th look like? Perhaps it will not hide as ʻOumuamua did, faint and fast, barely caught. Perhaps it will not slip by like Borisov, seen clearly but gone too soon. Perhaps it will not break apart like Atlas, leaving us with only dust and confusion. Perhaps the 4th will be unmistakable, a body so vast or so strange that no telescope can miss it. A sign that arrives not quietly, but in spectacle, visible to every eye on Earth, a visitor not only for astronomers, but for all of humanity. And if that happens, will we see it as science or omen? Our ancestors would not hesitate. They would say, the cycle is complete, the heavens have spoken, judgment has arrived. We, too, might cloak it in equations and data, but beneath the surface, the same fear will rise. The 4th will not feel like discovery. It will feel like sentence. But there is another possibility, more haunting still. What if the 4th sign does not come from outside? What if the sequence was never about comets or visitors, but about us? The first 3 taught us to look. The silence taught us to wait. The 4th may be not a body from beyond the stars, but an act we commit ourselves, an answer, a response, a signal we choose to send. What if the 4th sign is not arrival but reply? Imagine it. After years of silence, humanity decides to speak. A powerful broadcast, a probe launched beyond the reach of our system, a deliberate mark left on the sky. The first 3 signs came to us. The 4th, perhaps, must come from us. And when it does, the silence will break forever, not because the heavens spoke, but because we did. And yet, the risk is obvious. To send a 4th sign is to reveal ourselves. To break silence is to give up hiding. Perhaps that is why the sky is so quiet. Perhaps others have already learned the danger of being the first to speak. If the fourth is truly ours to send, then the question becomes unbearable. Do we dare? The rhythm presses in on us. 1, 2, 3, and then silence. A silence that grows heavier with each year. A silence that does not feel like ending, but waiting. Sooner or later, the fourth will come, whether as a messenger from the stars, or as a signal from Earth, or as the crushing realization that the silence itself was the fourth sign all along. And when it does, the world will change, because once 4 has spoken, the cycle is complete. The question is not whether there will be a fourth. The question is only this: when it arrives, will we recognize it? What if the fourth sign is not out there at all? What if it has been waiting here, on Earth, all along? For centuries, we have looked upward for messengers, for fiery visitors that arrive unannounced, stir our imagination, and vanish into silence. ʻOumuamua, Borisov, 3-eye Atlas. They reminded us that we are not sealed off, that silence is fragile, that the heavens can break their stillness at any time. But what if the next messenger is not a comet, not a rock, not an intruder from beyond? What if the next messenger is us? Consider what we have already done. Without meaning to, we became loud. Our radio towers leaked voices into the dark. Our radars pulsed signals brighter than stars. Our probes, Voyager, Pioneer, New Horizons, slipped across the edge of the solar system, carrying plaques and records etched with greetings. They were meant as scientific experiments, nothing more. Yet to the universe, they are messengers. They carry our fingerprints. They are the first words we have spoken beyond Earth, and they are irreversible. Once a probe leaves, it cannot be recalled. Once a signal escapes, it cannot be silenced. We cannot undo our announcements. We are already messengers, whether we intended it or not. Perhaps that is the true shadow cast by ʻOumuamua, Borisov, and 3-eye Atlas. They reminded us what it feels like to be on the receiving end, to witness a stranger pass through our sky without explanation. We called them anomalies. We speculated wildly. We filled the silence with fear. But what if somewhere, light years away, another world looks at Voyager in the same way? A thin disk of gold hurtling through their system, carrying strange markings, vanishing into the dark. To them, we are the anomaly, we are the comet, we are the messenger. And if that is true, then perhaps the fourth sign has already happened. Perhaps it was not an intruder that arrived, but a probe that left. Perhaps Voyager itself was the fourth, unbound and drifting, whispering across the stars, declaring that Earth exists, that Earth speaks, that Earth is no longer silent. But there is a difference. The messengers that came to us gave no explanation. They appeared once and vanished. We, by contrast, cannot resist the urge to explain ourselves. We etched our diagrams, our music, our mathematics into golden discs. We transmitted coded greetings into the void. We want to be known. We cannot accept silence. And here lies the danger. To become messenger is to abandon caution. To speak into the dark is to reveal not only our existence, but our location. The watchers, if they exist, may be listening in silence, waiting for such signs. To send a message is to surrender control. Once sent, it belongs not to us, but to them. Still, silence is unbearable. The temptation to speak is irresistible. Some scientists dream of building powerful transmitters to send deliberate, focused signals toward nearby stars. They argue that we cannot wait passively, that we must become active participants in the conversation. Others warn against it, calling it reckless, even suicidal. But perhaps the debate does not matter, because in truth, we have already spoken. We became messengers long ago. Think of the irony. For centuries, humanity prayed for signs from the heavens. Now the heavens may wait for signs from us. We used to read omens in Comets. Now we etch our own omens into metal and launch them outward. The cycle has reversed. The pupil has become the teacher. The witness has become the speaker. And maybe this was always inevitable. Visitors like ʻOumuamua and 3-eye Atlas may not have been warnings at all, but invitations. Perhaps they came not to frighten us, but to provoke us, to push us into speaking. The silence that followed may not be absence, but expectation, the quiet of an audience waiting for us to answer. If that is true, then the fourth sign is not something we wait for. It is something we become. It is us, finally breaking silence with intent, sending our voice into the dark with full awareness of the risks. The first 3 signs arrived from beyond. The 4th is our reply. And the question is not whether we will send it. The question is whether we already have. Every night, the bubble of our radio noise expands farther. Every year, our probes drift deeper. Every decade, our ambition grows stronger. The silence above presses in on us, and we lean forward, unable to hold back. We are impatient children at the edge of the stage, desperate to be noticed, desperate to be heard. So perhaps the story of the messengers has never been about them. Perhaps it has always been about us. We received the first 3. Now it is our turn. Humanity itself is the 4th. The unsettling truth is this. We may already be the answer to the silence. We may already be the sign. And if others are watching, then our role as messenger has already begun. What if silence was never meant to last? What if the long stillness after 3i Atlas is not emptiness at all, but tension like the air before thunder, the hush before a curtain rises, the pause before a word that will change everything? We look up and see quiet stars, patient and steady. But perhaps that patience is not calm. Perhaps it is expectation. Perhaps silence is only the space between breaths, waiting for the exhale. For centuries, humanity feared the sudden flare of comets, the messengers that arrived without warning. We believed they carried judgment, that they signaled famine, war, or plague. Today, we dress them in equations and call them anomalies, but the unease remains. ʻOumuamua broke categories. Borisov carried alien chemistry. 3i Atlas deepened the mystery. 3 signs, then nothing. The quiet that followed is heavier than noise. It presses against us. It forces us to ask the question we cannot shake. When will silence end? Maybe it already has. Our world is no longer silent. Our broadcasts leak outward. Our probes drift beyond the reach of our Sunday. The end of silence may not come from above, but from us. Every word we speak into the dark, every song that rides a signal across the void, every message etched into a golden disc is already breaking the stillness. To us, the sky looks quiet. To anyone listening, Earth has been loud for a century. The end of silence is already written into the expanding bubble of our noise. But there is another possibility more haunting, more difficult to ignore. What if the silence is not ours to break? What if the silence belongs to them? Imagine an audience, seated in perfect stillness, watching us stumble on the stage, waiting for the moment to applaud or condemn. Imagine the watchers, patient and hidden, letting silence stretch longer and longer until we can bear it no more. Then, when the time is right, the silence will snap, the 4th sign will blaze, and we will know beyond doubt that we were never alone. Every generation has wrestled with this question. The medieval monks who saw comets as torches, the emperors who claimed guest stars as omens, the astronomers who wrestled with orbits and laws, all of them lived in the shadow of silence, waiting for it to end. And now it is our turn. We have tasted 3 signs. We have endured the pause that followed. We know too well how silence can weigh heavier than sound. Perhaps the end of silence will not be a single moment. Perhaps it will be gradual, a faint anomaly detected by chance, a fragment of code hidden in a comet's dust, a whisper in the static of radio surveys, something small, almost missed, but undeniable. The silence will not break like thunder. It will fray like fabric, thread by thread, until we realize the stillness has been unraveling all along. Or perhaps it will be sudden, unmistakable, a messenger larger and stranger than any before, a body blazing across the sky, visible to all, undeniable, final. Not a whisper, but a shout. Not a hint, but a revelation. The silence will shatter, and humanity will never be the same. And what if silence itself is the greatest message? What if the long pause after 3i Atlas was not indifference, but design? Silence sharpens paranoia. Silence breeds preparation. Silence makes us restless, impatient, alert. The watchers, if they exist, may have known this. They may have chosen to speak 3 times, then wait, then let silence do the work. And it has worked. We are awake now. We are listening. We are ready. The thought that lingers is the most unsettling of all. What if the end of silence is closer than we think? What if even now, As you listen, a fourth sign is already inbound, rushing through the void, unseen but inevitable. The quiet sky above you may not be quiet at all. It may be the breath before the exhale, the pause before the next word, the silence before the end of silence. One day, the wait will be over. The heavens will speak again, whether in fire, in dust, in signal, or in shadow. And when they do, silence will end. The question is not if, the question is when.